Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into every single GOA'ULD that we know of from STARGATE SG1. But before I begin, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, let's jump straight into it.
Yes, it is. But generations from now, they will speak of Master Tilk of Chulak, first prime of Baal, first leader of the free Jafar nation.
So Baal was a GOA'ULD and one of the leaders of the Trust, becoming one of the last System Lords. Once an underlord in the Great Goa'uld dynasty, Baal left Ra's service and rose to a position of power among the System Lords in his own right. After the fall of the Goa'uld at the hands of the Jaffa Rebellion, Baal was the only known surviving System Lord and became determined to rebuild his power base. He succeeded somewhat with his clones, but over time they were all killed, with the last being extracted by the Tok'ra. The real Baal was finally killed by Colonel Cameron Mitchell, who set an ambush for him when he tried to alter history. So, first seen during the Second Goa'uld dynasty, Baal was originally one of Ra's prominent underlords in service to him on Earth, where he was thought of to be the son of El, who was, in actuality, Ra by all the Canaanites. It was in this role that he oversaw many cultures' development of an agricultural system, the Canaanites and the Phocians among them. Baal's influence spread throughout these cultures so much that he was known over the entire Mediterranean basin, and eventually most of the planet. He was rarely seen to be a kind overseer, however, and indeed, whenever his people failed to meet his strict food production quotas, he very often issued orders for the mass sacrifice of human lives. Though these measures led to overall prosperity for both the Goa'uld and the people, it came at the expense of many people, and so it perhaps came as no surprise that Baal was one of the first Goa'uld to encounter rebellion among his people, though it was to a much smaller scale than Ra's later rebellion. A few smaller villages abandoned worshipping him, and so, for their pride, Baal struck them down. It was during the time that the Goa'uld ruled Earth that he was sent to Kenai under the name Reyamin the Thunderer to kill its ruler, King Yam. When he fell from the favor of the Goa'uld, he cast Yam's body into the ocean on the planet and erected a floating city, Tisban, on the site of his death. This marks the beginning of the Kenai's people's enslavement to the Goa'uld. However, the people of the planet eventually rose up against Reyamin, using his own technology against him and forcing him to flee the planet. During this time, Baal was able to use his gravity technology to create black holes while using an anti-gravity device of ancient design as a shield, so that he wouldn't be affected by them. After he was overthrown, he took the power source of his shield with him, but left the rest of the technology behind, fleeing to his fortress world. He was forbidden from returning by the other System Lords, as they feared what he could do with the shield and anti-gravity technology at his disposal, and so he placed the shield's power source in a shrine on his fortress world, and while he continued experimenting with gravity technology, it was on a much smaller scale. And sometime after this, while the Goa'uld still ruled Earth, Baal was temporarily killed by Mott, and then resurrected through a sarcophagus by his sister Anat. After the fall of the Second Goa'uld dynasty, Baal was one of the first to oversee that the Tari would one day rebel, and so left the planet for the stars, earning him the wrath of his former master Ra, and causing him to be kicked out of the sun god's inner circle. Despite this setback, Baal managed to maintain control over several Jaffa, who had been loyal to Ra, and so was able to carve out a small niche for himself within the ranks of the System Lords. Though not entirely loyal to Baal, these Jaffa served him out of fear for his wrath. For even though they knew that Ra's wrath on them would be terrible if he managed to defeat Baal, Baal presented a more immediate threat to them. In addition to this, Baal did not hesitate to make examples out of anyone who betrayed him for their former lord. Following the Earth Rebellion, Ra's attention was drawn to Baal, whom he was able to defeat repeatedly until, in desperation, Baal turned to Sokar, ironically fulfilling that Earth's belief that he was indeed Baalzebub, the ancient of Satan. Having been well aware of Sokar's enmity toward Ra, Ball offered him a contingent of his Jaffa, several having in fact been a servant of Ra at some point, to contend with Ra in the field of battle. Although Sokar's forces were more than sufficient to deal with Ra on their own, Ra's former forces provided a unique insight into the workings over their former lord's tactics, and so proved extremely valuable to Sokar. In exchange for his help, Sokar took Ball under his wing for a time, aiding him in the struggle to survive against their mutual enemy. This alliance stood for generations, during which time Ball took advantage of Sokar's help, using both his own and his new master's forces to carve out a significant kingdom among the planets of the Milky Way. Because many such gains were made with the help of Sokar's Jaffa, Sokar considered the territory to be his, though he rarely pressed this issue and simply left Ball alone. Concentrating on his own war with Ra, Ball continued to pay tribute and give respect to Sokar for the course of his servitude, as well as providing a buffer against Ra's forces with his ever-growing territory, allowing Sokar to concentrate along a narrower frontier. Ball could not hide his true intentions forever, though, gradually subverting the Jaffa that Sokar left him to the point that he commanded their true loyalty. He eventually became content that he would be able to contend with the forces of Ra without Sokar's aid. Ball broke off his servitude to Sokar and declared himself the sovereign ruler of his sector of space. Sokar immediately tried to recall his Jaffa from Ball's service, but was met with no answer, and sent 2 of his fleets to reclaim the territory, which he believed Ball had stolen from him. Having learned of his attack, Ball made a daring gambit. When Sokar's fleets arrived in the 2 systems controlled by Ball, they were met with only 2 Hattaks each. As Sokar's fleets closed in to attack the ships, Ball unleashed his plan and used the Hattak to cause the system's stars to go supernova, destroying everything nearby, including themselves and 60 million inhabitants on the worlds. Quickly deciding that the price of war with Ball was too high to pay, Sokar and Ball agreed to have a peace treaty so that they could focus on their prime opponent, Ra. For centuries after the truce remained, both of the Goa'uld fighting against Ra rather than amongst each other. Though the war rained heavily on Ball, he managed to get himself into a position of power, and eventually became a system lord in his own right. Ball's war with Ra drew on until it reached a point where the attrition rate became unbearable for both, and so the 2 agreed to a ceasefire, though they still remained enemies at heart. Despite this, the 2 system lords continued to inflict covert raids over the other, as well as attacking each other through politics rather than force. These actions continued for more than 1,000 years until, in what apparently was a freak accident, Ra was no more. Unknown to the system lords at the time, Ra was killed by Colonel O'Neill and Dr. Jackson, who had used transportation rings to send an enhanced nuclear warhead on board his ship after a rebellion on Abydos. Though the Goa'uld did not know the truth behind the sudden death, Ball was quick to swoop in and claim much of Ra's disarrayed territory before Apophis was able to take control of the majority of it. He used this new territory to parlay his way into a dominant position among the system lords, gaining even more power than he had previously. When the system lords held a conference following the deaths of Apophis and Kronos, Ball seemed to function at first among equals, conducting the meeting. When Osiris appeared on behalf of Anubis to petition the system lords to accept him back, on the condition that Anubis would, in turn, destroy the Tari, Ball was one of those who voted to restore him to the state of system lord. What most of the other system lords did not know was that this was simply a ploy to learn more information about his potential foe. However, this very act earned Ball the eerie view, an enmity which had previously only manifested in minor tension. This resulted in open hostilities. The Tok'ra had at least one operative, Kanan, in Ball's service, though. When Kanan was discovered as a spy, his host was damaged so badly that he had to seek another. When Kanan's symbiote was implanted in Jack O'Neill, he went to Ball's outpost in order to save Ball's Lotar, Shaylin, who had become involved with. Ball's Jaffa were able to capture O'Neill before he was able to complete the mission, however, though Kanan left him so that Ball could not retrieve the information of the Tok'ra from him. Ball tortured O'Neill endlessly, killing him many times and bringing him back to life in order to gain the information that Kanan had left in his mind. However, when SG1 informed you that Ball had been conducting weapons research on the planet, he sent a fleet which destroyed the facility and thus freed O'Neill. Unknown to Ball, his loyal underlord Mott was plotting against him, having seized control of P4S-237 100 years previously after Ball abandoned it. Believing that its Naquita mines had run dry, Mott planned to use the situation to help gain favor with Anubis, and power as Ball had fallen out of Anubis's favor with his defeats by Lord Yu. With the help of the villagers, SG1 defeated Mott and killed him, saving Ball from his plans, unknown to Ball himself. Anubis subsequently failed in his attempt to destroy the Tari, and moved against the other system lords, demonstrating an impressively powerful fleet, which only the combined fleet of the system lords could even hope to take on. Though Yu was originally given the position to lead the alliance of the system lords' forces, his growing senility left him unable to do so, and so Teal'c and Ashu convinced Ball to assume control of the fleet and lead the war against Anubis. With Anubis in the atmosphere of Lingara causing his shield to be weakened, he attacked and destroyed Anubis's mothership, but Anubis escaped in his escape pod. A short time later, he conquered the planet Erebus, and his Jaffa captured Braytak and Ryak. The camp was freed by SG1 and Ragnar. After the fall of Anubis, Ball took over most of Anubis's former holdings, including the Coal Warriors and the Asgard beaming and hologram technology, so that he could wage war on the other system lords in order to become the most powerful of them. This led the other Goa'uld into a failed attempt to negotiate with the Tari for their support against Ball. When SG1 was trapped in Anubis's base on P2X-887, he used the opportunity and lied to General Jack O'Neill and claimed to have captured them. He offered a trade, SG1 for Camulus. O'Neill eventually agreed, and Camulus was turned over to him, with his supposedly rigged ZPM to assassinate Ball. This failed as O'Neill gave Camulus a dead ZPM, and it was later stated that Ball killed Camulus. Following Malak's death on Haktil, Ball claimed his domain and forces as his own. Ball quickly began to conquer the other system lords using Anubis's forces, and within a year of the system lords had been reduced to 3 others, all unable to fight him. However, at some point, Anubis managed to return and secretly retake control of his forces from Ball. Ball was forced to serve under Anubis, much to his displeasure. At this point, Ball began to style himself Supreme Commander of the Goa'uld Empire. Secretly, however, he was serving Anubis. As a result of his advance, many system lords retreated to the planets they had once ruled, but abandoned to use as strongholds and hideouts. Among those were Ares, who tried to retake Arkan's world, but was killed by Jack O'Neill, who destroyed his Hatak with the Time Jumper, presumably leading to Ball absorbing Ares' territory too. Ball's advance against the other system lords was stopped only by a long-anticipated invasion of the Replicators into the Milky Way galaxy. The Replicator armadas, led by Replicator Carter, quickly overwhelmed and destroyed the Goa'uld system lords, and Ball found himself fighting a losing battle against the invaders. When knowledge of an ancient superweapon capable of destroying all life in the galaxy was discovered on Dakara, Ball secretly assisted Replicator Carter's original human self, Samantha Carter, and Sam's father, Jacob Carter, in modifying the weapon along with the DHD associated with Dakara's Stargate, destroying all replicators in the galaxy. Ball then moved in to take back Dakara when rebel Jaffa stormed his ship, forcing him to beam away. This effectively led to the end of the Goa'uld Empire, as one of their gods fleeing proved to all Jaffa that the Goa'uld weren't the gods they claimed to be. Even when the replicators were destroyed, Anubis still intended to claim the superweapon for himself, and use it to destroy all life in the galaxy. Anubis allowed Ball to live so that he may bear witness to the end of all galactic life. When Anubis's plan was foiled by Dr. Jackson and Oma Dasala, Ball was left as the only known surviving system lord, the others having been killed by the replicators, and Anubis being contained by Oma Dasala. With his power base gone following the destruction of the system lords and the rebellion of the Jaffa, Ball needed a place to hide. Fleeing to Earth, Ball set himself up as a businessman, and took control of the Trust, at the same time using Asgard cloning technology to make a series of clones of himself. He also planted an aquila bomb in the building in Seattle and threatened to blow it if Stargate Command and the Jaffa tried to kill him. They attacked anyway, and the building was beamed into space, and one of these clones was caught and executed by Garrick and his Jaffa. The real Ball and an indeterminate amount of clones escaped, allowing them to institute a series of plans to regain their power base. Later, Ball managed to regain an army of recruiting Jaffa, largely through the use of brainwashing. One of Ball's clones initiated a scheme to take control of the Jaffa High Council to prevent their rise to democracy with his brainwashing technology, turning key members of the Jaffa High Council against the idea of democracy. At the time, Ball merely claimed that he was doing this to provide strong leadership in the shape of himself to aid the Jaffa against the newly emergent threat of the Ori, but Vala, whom Ball had previously known as Katesh, later opinionated the subversion of the council was done to gain control of the Dakar superweapon, using it to destroy all life in the galaxy, apart from Ball and his slaves. This would have caused the Ori to lose interest in the galaxy, though Ball indicated this to be the case, saying it wasn't a very original plan. The scheme was foiled, and the clone was killed by Teal'c. Ball also planned to rebuild his empire by using Asgard transporters to steal stargates from other planets and hide them using a method developed by Nerus, Ball's former servant who had defected to the Ori and was captured by Stargate Command. His plan was foiled when Nerus returned to Ball and accidentally downloaded a virus into one of Ball's Hawtalks. The Stargates were then beamed off the Hawtalk by the newly built Earthship, the Odyssey, and the Hawtalk, along with several of Ball's clones, were destroyed by the Lucian Alliance. Later, Ball flew an Alkesh to Earth and was shot down by F-16 fighting Falcons. He was captured and taken to Stargate Command. He was interrogated by SG1 and told them his clones had turned on him, and the SGC needed to capture them because they had knowledge of the Sangral. He planted locator beacons in all of them, and they were using the tracking system on the Alkesh to capture them. After all the clones were captured, Malcolm Barrett, who was brainwashed, helped Ball escape. He forced Lieutenant Samantha Carter to give him ancient list of Stargate addresses, and they used the locator chips, which in close proximity to one another amplified the signal they sent out, and they were beamed out. When he discovered the existence of Merlin's anti-Ori weapon, that could not only destroy the Ori, but the Ancients as well, one of the Ball clones found the planet where the weapon was located. His ships could not locate it, so he had to come by Stargate. However, the puzzles made the Ascended Ancient Morgan Le Fay made it impossible for Ball to reach it. His Jaffa had abandoned him, trying to find a way to free him from a force field. He was then forced to work alongside SG1 and Adria. He was transported to the tomb of Mirrodin when the Ancient was awakened, who, in his days, likened Ball to Mordred. Ball attempted for the remainder of the time to find a way to dial out from the planet Stargate, which was locked into a random system that beamed the occupants of Mirrodin's tomb to random worlds in a closed-gate system to prevent discovery by the Ori. When Adria discovered the location of the world, Ball was stunned by the Ori commander with his stun weapon. His fate afterwards is unknown. It's possible that Ball was either killed or stranded on the planet. With the Ori making such advances into the Milky Way galaxy, Ball devised an ingenious plan. He intended to capture Adria and take her as a host, by ambushing SG1's plan to capture the Orisai. Upon capturing her, Ball sent a message to his clones to meet to discuss the situation. Once they arrived, he beamed canisters of symbiote poison onto the camp, killing his clones. After implanting himself into Adria, SG1 boarded his Hawtalk and killed another clone. Ball offered to help SG1 in driving the Ori army out of the galaxy, saying that the Ori were indeed dead. However, SG1 contacted the Tok'ra, who removed Ball from Adria, presumably killing him, but not before he released his symbiote toxin into her. Lieutenant Colonel Cameron Mitchell also expressed some doubt whether or not Ball was truly dead, fearing that one or more of the clones may have survived. At the time of the Atlantis expedition's encounter with the rogue Asgard Fenrir, the Tari and Free Jaffa Nation were planning a joint attack on one of Ball's bases. A Free Jaffa Nation fleet in the Odyssey gathered at Gullah in preparation for this attack, forcing John Shepard and Rodney McKay to meet the Odyssey at a planet in order to access the Asgard computer core. Despite these deaths, both the real Ball and at least one clone survived. The clone was ultimately tracked down through its tracking device, the true Ball apparently being the only Ball capable of removing his device. Taken to the Tok'ra homeworld to undergo an extraction, the clone warned SG1 and General Jack O'Neill that they had made a terrible mistake, as the real Ball had a failsafe in place in case such an eventuality. Despite the clone's warnings, the extraction ceremony proceeded without incident, and Ball's symbiote was extracted and died after the Tok'ra elder smashed the container holding it. Ball's host survived the extraction, and Vala planned to help him adjust. At the same time, the real Ball traveled back to 1939, using the solar observation outpost on Praxian, with a contingent of loyal Jaffa to sink the Achilles, with the Alpha Gate on board before it could reach the United States. However, the Colonel Mitchell of an alternate timeline where Ball's plan had succeeded was waiting and ambushed Ball's forces alongside Bosun when they emerged through the Stargate. Spotting Mitchell, Ball could only stare at him in shock before Mitchell shot Ball in the head with a Thompson submarine gun, finally killing him. The death of the real Ball in 1939 and his clone brought a final end to both Ball and the Goa'uld system lords. In the alternate reality, during an extraction of his clone, the real Ball went back in time to 1939 to change history by stopping the Stargate on Earth from ever reaching America, which ultimately resulted in Stargate Command and Stargate program never existing. When Ball got to Earth, he arrived on the ship Achilles and killed the crew of the ship carrying the Stargate, and he set a bomb before leaving through the Stargate to build a new empire in that time. Mitchell's grandfather managed to dump the bomb overboard where it exploded harmlessly, but the ship ended up trapped in the ice of the Arctic, allowing Ball's plan to work to officially change the timeline. In this alternate timeline, Ball, retaining the knowledge of his previous timeline, became the leader of the Goa'uld, using his knowledge of the other timeline to anticipate his enemies' moves and destroy them, as well as gaining the support of the other system lords. Ball also used his knowledge in other ways, by promising the establishment of a free Jaffa nation. Ball was able to sway Teal'c to his side as his first prime. He also made Katesh, who was still in control of Vala, having never been extracted from his queen. Ball went on to attack Earth with a massive fleet, but, having been impressed with the humans in the other timeline, advocated that they be not slaughtered and enslaved outright, but instead deceived. However, Katesh, suspicious of Ball's uncanny knowledge of Earth and how he had anticipated his enemies' moves, turned on him with the ultimate goal of seizing power for herself and stabbed him with a sword. However, she kept him alive long enough to interrogate him via a hand device, with Ball, who was in a weakened state and even near death, disclosing everything that he knew. When Teal'c returned, Ball hoped to be freed, only for Teal'c to realize that Katesh would kill him. This was proven true when Katesh instantly turned on Teal'c before removing the sword from Ball, which resulted in Ball's death straight away. But after Ball splitting in half as well, SG1, who had managed to escape the changes to the timeline by traveling in a wormhole back to Earth at the moment history changed, managed to use his device and the Stargate to travel back to 1929, which was the closest they could get, to stop him, although only Mitchell made it through. Colonel Mitchell was able to stop Ball and fix the timeline back to the correct course, with the alternate timeline version of Ball, the clone, and the real Ball all dead. Ra was the GOA'ULD system lord who personified the Egyptian sun god, and is the first to discover the Tari. His mate was Hathor, by whom he had a son Herer, and his brother was Apophis. His elite Jaffa were the Horus guards. Because of his power, authority, and cunning, Ra was the most powerful of the system lords. Despite the animosity system lords feel for each other, Ra was recognized as the supreme system lord of the GOA'ULD Empire, a title which made him nominal emperor of the GOA'ULD. It was because of this, and his supposed murder of Egeria, that the Tok'ra took their name, which literally means against Ra. After some 10,000 years of rule, Ra was finally killed by Colonel Jack O'Neill and Dr. Daniel Jackson, who ringed an enhanced nuclear warhead on board his ship after the Abydonians rebelled, and he was forced to abandon the planet and die. Nothing is known of Ra before he appeared in 22,000 BC at Apep's side, an underlord alongside Nud and Thoth, who was given ownership over a portion of Atok's territory and forces after the latest death at the hands of Apep. United under the rulership of Apep, Ra and his kind swept across the Milky Way galaxy like a plague, taking many worlds under their control and very nearly wiping out the Unas. It was during this time that Anubis grew in Apep's favor, eventually earning a place at his side and becoming his most trusted advisor. By 17,800 BC, Apep's original sons and daughters, Ra among them, became jealous of Anubis for the favor he had with Apep. It was perhaps only fitting that Anubis killed Apep, and that this very act caused the GOA'ULD to do one noble deed in their history. They banded their forces together in order to defeat Anubis. The battles raged for hundreds of years, very nearly decimating the GOA'ULD themselves, taking many Unas with them before Anubis was eventually defeated in 17,400 BC and banished by the GOA'ULD collective. Ra instated himself as the new ruler of the GOA'ULD Empire, reinstating the old order, which had been put in place by Apep. It was at this time that Ra also banished Thoth for his creation of unstable sarcophagus, though Thoth's understudy Telchak remained. To show his appreciation for her help in the fight against Anubis, Bastet was rewarded by Ra himself, who also introduced the former servants of Cyrus and Isis into the ranks of the Underlords. To ensure that the Anubis incident could never happen again, Ra also dismantled the superweapon, which had been Anubis' staple point in his attacks, and divided the crystals which powered it among the remaining GOA'ULD. It was then that the first GOA'ULD dynasty had ended, making way for the second. With the Unas of P3X888 in short supply and the GOA'ULD symbiotes growing once more at a steady rate, Ra and the other GOA'ULD were forced to push the limitations of their species. By 16,000 BC, Ra had managed to solidify his authority and appointed a new form of rulership to govern the GOA'ULD, and thus the System Lords were formed with Ra as the Supreme System Lord. Ra stated that entry into the body was awarded by a vote from the current members, creating a power system that served for thousands of years. Joining the first ranks of the System Lords were Osiris, Isis, Tiamat, and finally Yu, who at the time was thought to be a progressive ruler. During this period, Ra also took Egeria as his queen, though others such as Hathor would later fill this position. By 14,000 BC, the GOA'ULD discovered small quantities of naquita, which caused Ra to petition the System Lords for a new era of expansion, offering exclusive rights and access to the now dwindling Unas in exchange for shipments of the valuable material. Their attention diverted away from gaining power of their own. The System Lords set about exploring in order to gain more and more naquita. It was perhaps because of this expansionist nature of the GOA'ULD that the Asgard, for the first time in 13,860 BC, seeing the GOA'ULD for what they were, the Asgard immediately declared themselves enemies of the System Lord collective, and the GOA'ULD responded in kind. Relishing the opportunity to flex their muscles, the GOA'ULD soon struck against the Asgard, but it became apparent that they were more than a match for the stolen technology of the GOA'ULD. The GOA'ULD begrudgingly retreated, and having lost the coordinates for their home planet, and thus their primary source for hosts, Ra once again called for stockpiles of naquita, as well as putting an end to the ritual cannibalism, which had been part of the GOA'ULD society for generations. Nearly 4,000 years later, with their resources running low, the System Lords performed a daring attack against both the Asgard and the Furlings, which struck a resounding effect. Rather than winning the war, however, this simply caused the two races to fight back even harder, and in the years that followed, the Asgard dealt the GOA'ULD many major setbacks, though strangely did not press the attack. Perhaps if they had known the danger that the GOA'ULD would pose in the galaxy in years to come, the Asgard would have pushed harder. Despite the lack of head-on attacks, many skirmishes and bloody battles raged on for several centuries, and somehow, Ra found himself leaving his Unas host in order to take the body of the Asgard Fenrir. However, the Asgard physiology began to reject Ra. Worse, in 9177 BC, he was injured in a battle with the Asgard. Fleeing his Asgard pursuers, Ra found a lush world in an alien system, Earth, It was there that he found the solution to the lack of hosts in a race of primitives who bowed to his divinity, the Tari. Transferring himself into one of these primitives, Ra became infused with new vigor and life, soon discovering that they provided a near-ideal host for his race. Planting a Stargate, which he had brought with him, the original remained undiscovered in the ice of Antarctica. Ra claimed Earth as his own. Ra quickly enslaved the human race, using the Stargate to keep in contact with the other GOA'ULD and informing them of his new bounty. The System Lords soon fought amongst themselves for the right to claim some of the Tari, but Ra instated a system which gave each System Lord stewardship in order for them to visit the planet and claim some followers, who would take into a world of the GOA'ULD's choice, to act as breeding stock. Ra also divided the planet into strict geographical lines to ensure that no System Lord would encroach upon another's territory. He, however, took place as the ruling god in several other cultures, such as the Canaanites, where he was known as El. Ra took himself some of his followers off-world to a planet known as Abydos, where he used them as slaves to mine Naquita for himself. Things seemed to be going well for Ra, as his ruling of the System Lord seemed to be working better than any before him. However, in 9002 BC, Satesh managed to coax Osiris and Isis into attempting an assassination of Ra. This ended badly for the two, as Ra stripped them of their titles and forcibly removed them from their hosts, putting them in canopic jars so they could suffer for eternity. Because of this, Satesh went into hiding so that Ra could not take his vengeance on him. It was soon after this, around 8721 BC, that the renegade Anubis returned from his banishment at the head of a conquered army, and came with the promise to eliminate the Asgard in exchange for absolute loyalty and control of the GOA'ULD. Furious, Ra assembled his own army, and rallied several other System Lords behind him in order to once again defeat Anubis. Despite his previous victory, most GOA'ULD took this opportunity to either turn against Ra and join forces with Anubis, or simply stand on the sidelines to see which ruler came out victorious. The end result was Anubis being defeated once again, but before Ra could deliver the final blow, Anubis made his escape through the Stargate from assistance within Ra's forces. Having played on Ra's distraction, Sokar seized control of Earth before Ra could return and transformed it into a vision of hell, making clear his plans to seize Ra's position as Supreme System Lord. Furious, Ra threw Sokar off of Earth with the help of the other System Lords, most notably Kronos and Apophis. Sokar fled on a starship, and though his power was diminished, Sokar continued to battle against Ra and all of his followers, particularly Apophis. In 4006 BC, Apophis dealt a critical blow to Sokar's forces, and once again stabilized Ra's rule, though again Sokar survived and went back to rebuilding his forces. Sometime before 3000 BC, Ra populated the world of Sekhet Hetep with slaves he had rescued to work for him. It quickly became one of his most dedicated religious centers, but a few decades after it was first colonized, it was cut off entirely from the Stargate network. Though Ra was no longer able to visit his people, their belief had already been built into their society, and no word of rebellion on Earth ever reached them, so they continued to serve him for thousands of years. In the original timeline on Earth, the Tari became aware of the truth behind the GOA'ULD, learning that they were not in fact all-powerful gods, but simply beings with advanced technology, and so rose against their oppressors. Choosing the moment when the System Lords were at their most complacent, and when Ra was overseeing his other territories, they overthrew their oppressors as well as the Jaffa guards, killing several on-planet GOA'ULD and burying the Stargate. While the loss of the Tari was a great affront to Ra, his continuing battles with the Asgard demanded more of his attention, so as he had several other breeding planets, he simply let Earth be. However, when SG1 became trapped in 3000 BC, after traveling back in time to acquire ZPM from Ra, they tried to aid the Egyptians in overthrowing Ra, but Jack O'Neill, Colonel Carter, and Teal'c were all executed, and caused Ra to remove the Stargate when he fled the planet. However, a team comprising of a version of O'Neill, Carter, and Teal'c from an alternate future arrived on the scene in 2995 BC to make sure the gate was buried in Giza, so it could be discovered in 1928, as it was in the original timeline. In 2492 BC, after the alternate SG1 caught his attention by raiding Abydos for an immature symbiote for Teal'c, then going directly back to Earth, Ra returned as Hitak to reconquer the planet. Ra initially regained full control over the area around the Stargate, but didn't expand further, having apparently left in such a rush that he didn't take a full contingent of Jaffa with him. He was hampered by a rebellion led by both the alternate SG1 and the real SG1, who followed 3 rogue Tok'ra through time. While on Earth, Ra met Egeria, who claimed to have been a GOA'ULD trapped on Earth by the rebellion, and was charmed by her, quickly trusting her and giving her a Karakesh. Eventually, what appeared to be the Ancients attacked his Hitak, and Ra retreated to his ship to fight back. Ra figured out it was just a few puddle jumpers, 2 of which were the time jumpers and 1 was piloted by a descendant of the Ancients, and tried to steal the Stargate and leave. When the jumper, piloted by Dr. Carolyn Lamb, targeted the Peltac, Egeria used the distraction to blast Ra with a Karakesh, severely injuring him. She then had Teal'c injure him in the side with a staff weapon, and claimed that the alternate Daniel Jackson had escaped and done so. With Ra injured, Egeria had him placed in a sarcophagus and took command of the Hitak, ordering a retreat to Abydos. Ra never returned for fear of admitting he screwed up to the other GOA'ULD and potentially damaging his power. Word of this revolt somehow left the planet and made its way to the GOA'ULD breeding ground on Dendera, most likely through a system lord working against Ra, where the GOA'ULD queen, Merasis, ruled in Ra's stead. The humans living there had long embraced the thoughts of a rebellion, and so word of Earth's triumph sparked them into action. And soon Ra and Merasis' forces were overthrown, and the native Denderans purged the tomb of Ra of any GOA'ULD influence, treating it as a holy place for their rebellion. Because of Earth and Dendera's rebellion against him, Ra outlawed writing on all of his worlds and caused them to come to a technological standstill. On planets which were rich in naquita, trinium, or other materials which he needed, Ra forced his subjects into slavery and mined the planets for everything they were worth. On some worlds, such as Abydos, he used only a handful of Jaffa and scare tactics to keep the local population in check, while on other, more densely populated worlds, he employed his massive armies as shock troops as well as intrusive police forces. Despite this, Ra was known to richly reward those who served him well, and commonly showered them with wealth and honors. However, anyone who went against him were treated with torture and death, as well as being forced to serve under him unconditionally. On most of his worlds, Ra's people would congregate in small cities, where they would be allowed a degree of autonomy provided they did not rebel against him, and as long as they continued to work in the mines to pay their tribute. Ra was known to have a select group of allies who he could trust to side with him in times of crisis, including his Queen Hathor and his son Harrower, who worked as his agent for several millennia while secretly plotting to overthrow him. In an unknown date after the loss of Earth, Ra created the Trial of Ra, a contest where those who sought to become particularly high-ranking servants of Ra competed in various trials across different planets. It proved to be a highly deadly test, but some overcame it. Having witnessed the stagnation of the GOA'ULD for several millennia, as well as Ra's singular desire to wipe out the Asgard, the Queen Egeria spawned a legion of symbiotes in 1002 BC, which opposed the ways of Ra in order to change the balance of power. To add insult to injury, she even named her children the Tok'ra, literally meaning against Ra, and began her rebellion against the other GOA'ULD. Ra's Queen Hathor, one of the last GOA'ULD who remained on Earth after the Stargate was buried, was later imprisoned in her tomb in 132 BC for all eternity. Luckily for her, the tomb had a sarcophagus which kept her alive for thousands of years before she was freed by a team of archaeologists. Hundreds of years later, in 37 BC, the GOA'ULD lost 2 key worlds as well as several other vital installations. Suspecting at first the Asgard, Ra later discovered that it had in fact been a traitor in his midst, and so convened a meeting with the System Lords to deal with the situation. It was at this meeting that Egeria finally revealed her act of betrayal, and so she was sentenced to eternal damnation inside a stasis jar in Pangar, though she too was found thousands of years later and also freed. Because of this, Ra and the other GOA'ULD outlined several new measures to keep the control of both GOA'ULD queens and naquita in check. Because of all these happenings during the course of Ra's rule, the System Lords under him once again went back to quarreling amongst themselves. threatening to undo all that Ra had worked towards when he tried to unify his race. Similarly, Ra singled out any of his enemies who had sided with Anubis in his last attempt at power and expelled them from all ranks of the System Lords, bringing about the end of the Second GOA'ULD dynasty. Ra soon began to impose his will on the GOA'ULD once more, attempting to regain power he once had over 10,000 years ago, and creating a new group of System Lords, this time incorporating Apophis, Baal, Bastet, Cronus, Morrigan, Olokun, and Yu, among others. The GOA'ULD once again went back to fighting the Asgard, and for the first time started to make progress against their more advanced foe. Discovering that the Asgard had other allies, but they somehow disappeared, they kept pushing the battles on even after hearing of another threat which had emerged. It was in 257 AD, after yet another setback, that Ra once again instigated a new set of principles, this time demanding that the other GOA'ULD acquiesce in laying out formal terms for the appropriation of GOA'ULD larvae, Jaffa, and the division of Naquadah. Due to the renewed threat of the Asgard, the other symbiotes accepted the terms, and for a time learned to work together for the greater goal. Sometime before Teal'c became first prime of Apophis, Ra was at war with Apophis. They were battling over a planet, and Ra appeared to be winning the battle, but Apophis soon got the upper hand and decimated Ra's forces. For winning the battle, Gregtech offered Teal'c to become his successor. The major loss may have led to Ra's downfall. Ra's reliance on the humans always puzzled the other System Lords, as he used them not only as servants and slaves and religious leaders, but also as warriors and even bodyguards. By 1995, Ra's first prime was Anubis, a human who had been raised by the people of Abydos and turned into a vicious leader. He was often known to handpick human warriors from the ranks of his armies, beings who other System Lords would treat as cannon fodder, and promote them to be senior officers in his military. Nearly 2,000 years later, the first team who traveled through Earth through the Stargate to Abydos encountered Ra. Realizing they were Tari, he decided to send the nuclear warhead they brought back to Earth, enriched with Naquadah, which would cause an explosion 100 times greater than originally intended. He also ordered Dr. Daniel Jackson to execute Colonel Jack O'Neill, Charles Kowalski, and Ferretti, lest the Abydonians doubt their god, taking an amulet with his symbol that Catherine Langford gave Jackson. A group of youths, having learned the truth about Ra, helped the Tari to escape. Jackson and Kowalski encouraged the natives to rebel against Ra. The youths and the Tari hijacked the Naquadah tribute being sent to Ra's mothership, and Ra ordered the warhead sent to Earth. At that point, the attack began. Confined to just their numbers, the battle began with the Horus Guards, easily overpowering them. Jackson also ringed aboard his mothership, hoping to revive a dead Share. Ra discovered them and attempted to kill Jackson with his hand device. However, as this was going on, O'Neill used the transportation rings to decapitate Ra's first prime, which also took Ra's right arm as well as Jackson and Share off the ship, although not before Jackson stole back the amulet. Moments later, Kasuf and the rest of the Abydonians arrived en masse, rebelling against Ra. Believing Abydos lost, Ra took his ship into orbit. O'Neill had activated the warhead, but Ra had disabled the deactivation. Unable to stop the countdown, O'Neill and Jackson ringed the warhead aboard Ra's ship while it was orbiting the planet, destroying the ship and finally killing Ra. After Ra's death, an unknown GOA'ULD System Lord, later found out to be Apophis, traveled to various worlds including Earth, to find a suitable host for his mate, Amenet. Many individuals, including Major General George Hammond, thought Apophis was actually Ra. This was disproven after Jackson finally figured out the differences between the two System Lords in Children of the Gods. Many System Lords rose to great power in the vacuum caused by Ra's death. However, none had the sort of command over the others that Ra had held. The main ones that rose to power were Apophis, Anubis, and Baal. During the mission shortly after meeting Erisbach, SG1 were tricked into participating in the trial of Ra as part of a scheme by Mott, Ra's mate, to kill them in revenge for Ra's death. During this quest, SG1 learned that Ra was not a GOA'ULD, but was another race entirely, their discoveries suggesting that Ra had some unspecified ties to the Ancients and the Ascended Beings. In 2003, Anubis, who had managed to return a year before, traveled to Abydos in search of the Eye of Ra. one of the eyes of the goa'uld, and a powerful power source for his superweapon. Daniel Jackson, who had ascended, discovered that Ra had hidden it on Abydos, and Anubis realized it too and attacked the planet. Eventually, SG1 found a secret chamber in the Abydos pyramid, which Ra used as a treasure room. Among the treasures were the Eye of Ra in a secret compartment, and the Lost City tablet that told the story of the ancients and the existence of their lost city. Anubis eventually got the Eye of Ra and destroyed Abydos, but SG1 escaped with the tablet from Ra's collection and began their search for Atlantis. Years later, another goa'uld claiming to be Ra risen from the dead started to rise to power, although he seemed to possess all the knowledge and talents of Ra, even going as far as to locate several hidden caches of resources hidden away by Ra. He was in fact simply the offspring of Ra, and so contained his genetic memory. Despite this, he managed to draw many Jaffa to him, who truly believed he was the sun god reborn. Lord Yu is considered to be one of the most reasonable system lords, who has kept his realm stable via a combination of pragmatism, ruthlessness, and enlightened self-interest. Yu is a pragmatic and practical goa'uld, one who is not a punitive ruler. He is the oldest of the goa'uld, and some would say the greatest of all of them. Lord Yu speaks with instantaneous authority. Through irritation, constantly tinges his voice. Rarely does he lose his temper, and only orders reprisals when he believes that doing so serves his long-term interests. During the first goa'uld dynasty, Yu actively supported Ra, since he kept the other system lords in line. In his rivalry with Kronos, the conflicts between the two usually ended in a stalemate, despite Kronos' impressive military might and resources. The volatile, aggressive Kronos often made foolhardy moves that Yu was able to counter via better strategies. Yet, due to his conservatism, Yu was able to take advantage of all opportunities to kill Kronos. In addition, Kronos was often in conflict with the other system lords, and never gained their support, which helped Yu. Recently, Yu was in conflict with both Morrigan and Olokun, and though the application of superior force and strategy, he remained victorious. In the far past, he had 4 goa'uld queens under his control. All but one of them has died from old age. The remaining queen, who is too old to spawn, still retains a position of trust and respect. Yu was also rumored to have up to 100 concubines spread across holdings, which adopted human sons on each of his planets, whom were in charge during his absence. His biological children have been appointed to cultural and political postings, rather than military or political positions, thereby keeping true power away from their hands. His Jaffa were given more latitude compared to the first primes and generals of other goa'uld, but are expected to achieve more. To ensure that no Jaffa immigrants can be infiltrated as spies into his realm, he only promotes those Jaffa of his own realm to positions beyond the rank of captain. Among his upper-level officers, most of them have personally known Lord Yu since their childhood. He handpicked them for their positions after checking with the first prime and obtaining his approval. Due to the extremely rigid controls that Lord Yu has implemented over the military's behaviors and contacts, the Tok'ra have been unable to infiltrate his forces, and one Tok'ra operative is believed to have defected into his army. Lord Yu is capable of committing acts of brutality, but prefers using bribes and rewards to maintain order in his domain. With a realm as extensive as his, it's a more effective strategy for keeping order, permitting him to conserve time and resources for other more pressing issues. He also uses the superior technology at his disposal to influence the production of food and agriculture by his subjects. Lord Yu will either withhold or grant assistance to his subjects, thereby gaining the loyalty of the population. Loyal or compliant subjects experience reward-breaking crops, and problematic or rebellious subjects have their food and water supplies held hostage. By making it known that such practices are not common among the other system lords, he has ensured good feelings and loyalty among all his subjects, from the lowest mine worker or farmer to the most elevated Jaffa. The armies of Lord Yu are huge, with over 1 million Jaffa and a fleet of 16 Hatak vessels. Because his worlds are connected via a well-planned selection of transport corridors and satellites, it has made them extremely defensible and therefore very difficult to take via a direct attack. Since Lord Yu was alive during the goa'uld's war against the Asgard, one of the few left from that conflict, he is extremely wary of them. Lord Yu refuses to underestimate the Asgard's technological and tactical capabilities, and is a strong supporter of pursuing strategy that avoids direct confrontation with the Asgard. Yu was part of the delegation that was sent by the System Lords to negotiate Earth's entry into the Asgard's Protected Planets Treaty, along with Kronos and Nirrti. He partially favored the treaty, as his interests no longer resided in that area of the Milky Way, looking towards other exploits. After SG1 revealed Nirrti's treachery to kill Kronos, Yu was convinced to allow Earth into the treaty, and also let them keep their Stargates, which were originally to be forfeited as a condition of the treaty, although he and Kronos did note that any SG teams found on gold-controlled planets would still be fair game. During the aftermath of the deaths of Apophis, Kronos, and Herer, Yu was among the System Lords who engaged in combat with the others to dominate the power vacuum. He made strides against Olukan, but soon began to suffer attacks by an unknown adversary. When the System Lords gathered to end the conflict, Osiris, who recently gained the respect of the GOA'ULD, arrived as an emissary on behalf of Anubis, whom he revealed to be the one behind the attacks. Yu was the only one of the System Lords present who had voted Anubis gain his former rank of System Lord, and was the only one among the High Council who had originally banished him in the first place. Dr. Daniel Jackson, posing as his Lotard Jaren, attempted to use Telchak to kidnap Osiris in order to free his host, Sarah Gardner, but Yu stumbled upon them. Osiris stabbed Yu with a knife, but Yu survived and declared war on Anubis. When Teal'c led a raid on P3X-042, his Jaffa captured Teal'c. Noting that Teal'c was not one to blindly follow another, Yu allowed him to leave unharmed after he revealed the treachery of Kitano, the new leader of the Jaffa rebellion, inspiring Teal'c to challenge Kitano and Joma Seku, resulting in him learning that Kitano was actually Imhotep. When Colonel Jack O'Neill was captured by Baal and taken to his secret fortress, the SGC contacted Yu with information about it, knowing that he would attack the fortress as Baal was hiding in it, his anti-gravity research from the other GOA'ULD. In the message, they asked Yu to target the power generators first so that O'Neill could escape. Yu sent his Hitachi to the fortress. He bombarded it from orbit and knocked out the power generators first as asked. O'Neill escaped thanks to Yu's attack, and Baal abandoned the fortress, which was left heavily damaged until SG1 returned for a raid a year later in which it was destroyed. Yu then spent the next year fiercely campaigning against Anubis, and finally managed to rally the other System Lords against him. However, the power of the sarcophagus was beginning to fail to fully restore him, until he reached the point where he was no longer able to take a new host. Yu began to suffer from a sense of senility, giving blatantly foolish orders that could jeopardize the campaign against Anubis. In turn, his first prime Oshu had to take control of his master's empire to keep it from falling into anarchy, and when Baal took leadership of the United Alliance of the System Lords, Oshu agreed to obey Baal as long as his actions led to the destruction of Anubis and the betterment of his master's territory. When Baal took control of the Coal Warriors, Yu was accompanied by Camulus, Amaterasu, and his first prime in the second delegation to Earth, to seek their help in defeating Baal. His senility showed during the negotiation once again, when he believed that the System Lords are still facing Anubis. Yu and Amaterasu left empty-handed, while Camulus sought asylum. Over the next year, Amaterasu and Yu campaigned against Baal, while the rest of the System Lords fell, fled, or surrendered. At a meeting in the Hasara space station, Baal sent his underlord, Selket, to negotiate the High Council's surrender. Replicator Carter arrived, posing as Samantha Carter, and ran a blade through Yu's chest, finally killing him. So Yu can be fairly pragmatic and methodical. While certainly no friend of Earth, Yu was mostly concerned with strengthening his hold on the territory he already controls, while other GOA'ULD will often haphazardly waste resources to try and conquer the galaxy. Yu is also fairly willing to negotiate with Earth, as opposed to the other System Lords which view all humans as just livestock, and achieve a diplomatic solution more or less coexisting with the Tari, twice assisting them in their campaigns against the other System Lords when their forces were insufficient to the task at hand. However, it is stated that this due in no small part to the fact that the territories Yu controls are on the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy, and thus most of the other System Lords are located between Yu and Earth. Allowing Earth to survive helps destabilize Yu's GOA'ULD enemies located between the two. Another factor is simply the persona that Yu took, that of one of China's early emperors, who is not really considered a god per se. Like many other GOA'ULD, however, Yu does generally seem to believe himself and his own propaganda, unlike Baal, who privately acknowledged the falsehood of his claim and was rather flippant about it. Still, Yu rarely asserts this fact, even when questioned, or endeavor to force others to acknowledge it, as opposed to Apophis and Sokar, who are rather self-obsessed with their status as gods. Unlike other Goa'uld, who might agree to an alliance with the Tari to achieve an immediate goal and then turn against them when the time is right, Yu is generally shown to keep his word and stick to their agreement. The only time he betrayed Earth was when his senility caused him to make a mistake. Also, unlike other Goa'uld, who will attempt to exploit any chance to kill the Shulva Teal'c, and only fail to do so when Teal'c escapes or kills them himself, Yu once allowed Teal'c to live, even after Kitano had attempted to convince Teal'c to assassinate him. Yu implying that he admired Teal'c's ability not only to blindly serve another, although it should be noted that his actions also undermined Imhotep's attempt to infiltrate the Jaffa rebellion, suggesting that Yu's true goal was to defeat his adversary while saving face. As he became increasingly senile, Yu's orders became more and more erratic and unreliable, but his past actions ensured the continued loyalty of his first prime Oshu, who took control of Yu's armies, while leaving his master as a public figurehead, agreeing to serve the more mentally stable Baal so long as Baal's actions would serve to benefit Yu, such as through ensuring the destruction of Anubis. So, in the aftermath of the original movie, following the death of Ra, Apophis' power increased significantly during 1997, along with the knowledge of his existence. In order to find a new host to his mate, he used the Stargate on Chulak to search various planets for appropriate females, including Earth and Abydos. Apophis arrived on Earth before the Stargate was set to be buried and kidnapped female United States Air Force Senior Airman Carol Westerings. Despite resistance by other airmen, he was not stopped and was able to return to Chulak. He later arrived at Abydos, while Colonel Jack O'Neill's team was present and kidnapped Share and Skara. With his job done, he had his mate, a symbiote, and check the females and kill them if they weren't adequate. Apophis killed Westerings, but accepted Share as his new mate. Arriving at a village in Chulak, he revealed the implanted Share to a group of individuals, which included SG1. Apophis ordered SG1 taken prisoner, and they were thrown into a large cell with the other prisoners. He returned to the cell and ordered his Jaffa servants to locate children to select the children of the gods. Once the children were selected, Apophis ordered the other prisoners executed and promptly left to go to the Stargate. The execution was foiled by O'Neill and Apophis' first prime, Teal'c, and they, along with the rest of SG1 and the refugees, attempted to stop Apophis from leaving with Skara. Their attempts failed, and Apophis and his group of unknown people left the planet. In revenge for the actions of SG1 and SG2, Apophis had a number of his Jaffa attempt to invade Stargate Command. However, his attempts were faltered by the SGC's Stargate Iris. Apophis eventually stopped his assault after a number of attempted invasions. Continuing his search for the seemingly cloakable Fenri on a planet occupied by the Nox, Apophis attempted to capture a Fenri, with 3 other Jaffa guards, including Shackle. At the same time, SG1 was investigating the creature in hopes of obtaining its cloaking ability. Apophis encountered SG1 who had ambushed him, but he was able to activate his personal force shield within his hand device before he could be stunned. Using one of his guard's staff weapons, he was able to kill all members of SG1 except for Teal'c. The Nox took SG1 along with the injured Shackle and healed them. When Shackle escaped, he alerted Apophis to the incredible powers of the Nox, which prompted an attack. However, Apophis' attack was foiled by a revived SG1. Colonel Jack O'Neill was ready to stun Apophis, but before he could, the Nox transported Apophis through the Stargate. Because of the problems the Tari were causing the Goa'uld, Apophis, with his son Chlorel, took 2 Hawtalks in a campaign to conquer Earth. SG1, however, had already arrived on a Stargate being carried in Chlorel's mothership, and managed to rig the vessel to explode and incapacitate Chlorel. Gregtech, Apophis's former First Prime, also helped SG1 by directing Chlorel's mothership to move closer to Apophis and damaging the Peltax controls, unable to save his ship. Apophis and Chlorel ringed over to Chlorel's mothership and used the Stargate to escape, but the damage to Apophis was incalculable. Because of the loss of his two motherships and most of his serpent guards, Apophis's standing among the System Lords was considerably weakened. Apophis attempted to take revenge on Teal'c by brainwashing his son Ryak with Nishta and using him to infect Earth with a deadly plague through the Stargate. He also impregnated Share, the host of Amunet, with the hopes of using the child as a future host. He hid Share on her homeworld Abydos to keep the other System Lords from discovering her. However, Dr. Jackson and Teal'c thwarted his efforts, feeding him misinformation that Harrower has taken the child. Within a year, Apophis's forces were nearly depleted, suffering losses to both Harrower and Sokar. Fleeing from Sokar's forces, Apophis demanded sanctuary among the Tari, at the very least hoping to kill the Tari from him. However, the Tari soon turned Apophis over to Sokar after his death. Sokar revived him with a sarcophagus and sent him to Natu. Apophis managed to assume the guise of Neonak, First Prime of Bainar, Lord of Natu. However, at some point his face was horribly disfigured on one side, presumably from torture, and he took to wearing a sort of mask over that side after his escape. When SG1 and the Tok'ra Martuf arrived hoping to rescue Jacob Carter/Solmak, Apophis killed Bainar and incited a rebellion. He tortured SG1 trying to learn information to make Sokar spare his life, such as information about iris codes and how to contact the Asgard. While he greatly enjoyed torturing SG1, all he learned was that the Tok'ra were based on Entak. Planning to kill Sokar once he was in his presence, Apophis ringed aboard Sokar's mothership. However, Sokar had already conquered Entak, and there were no Tok'ra there. Sokar ordered Apophis to be killed, but soon Natu's core began to destabilize. Apophis killed Sokar's guards and managed to ring to Delmak, Sokar's homeworld. Sokar was killed when Natu's explosion destroyed his ship. There, he claimed that he had killed Sokar and took Sokar's forces for his own. Less than a year later, Stargate Command learned of Apophis's survival after he launched an attack on Chulak, searching for the Harcesis, and later launched an attack on Keb. He also built a new flagship, more powerful than the standard Hatak, and began to build new types of motherships. The latter was destroyed when SG1 sabotaged the construction facility. Apophis later came close to an alliance with Harrower, but the Tok'ra and SG1 were able to sabotage it, hoping to start a war between the two and decimating their power. However, Apophis had brought a cloaked fleet with him, and he was able to destroy Harrower's mothership, killing him, absorbing Harrower's forces into his own. Apophis at this point was easily the most powerful system lord within the Goa'uld Empire. With his fleet on the way back to attack the Tok'ra base on Vorash, Major Samantha Carter and Jacob Carter devised a bold trap. They intended to cause Vorash's sun to go supernova, hoping to destroy most of Apophis's fleet, and maybe even Apophis himself. The plan worked, but Apophis survived, capturing Teal'c in the process. Apophis' mothership and a Hatak that SG1 had acquired after they had killed Kronos was thrown into another galaxy, one which the Replicators were in. The Replicators destroyed Apophis' mothership, though Apophis was able to escape using a few Jaffa bodyguards and Teal'c, who had also been brainwashed into believing that he was his first prime. Apophis and his forces were able to take over the Hatak, but the Replicators had managed to sneak aboard. Apophis brought them into the Hatak. The Replicators took control, flying Delmak at incredible speeds up to 800 times the speed of light. Though SG1 and Jacob were able to escape, taking Teal'c with them, Apophis was trapped in the Peltak. SG1 was able to dismiss the sublight engine, causing an uncontrolled re-entry into Delmak. Apophis was killed in the crash. His death, following the death of Kronos a few days earlier, caused the System Lords to enter a war that the Tok'ra hoped would last for years. However, it helped Tanith and Zapakna become formidable players in the New Order forged. Worse, it also accelerated events, which resulted in the return of Anubis. So Sokar stands out among the System Lords due to his reputation for cruelty, tyranny, and relentless pursuit of power. His character is designed to invoke fear and awe, emphasizing the godlike status among the other System Lords. Here are some key aspects of Sokar's introduction. His reputation precedes him, and his very name is synonymous with terror. Planets under his control often live in constant fear of his wrath. The mere mention of Sokar's name is enough to instill fear in both Jaffa and human populations. Sokar's physical appearance is designed to be virtually striking and ominous. He wears a mask that covers the lower part of his face, adding an air of mystery and intimidation. His eyes glow with an unnatural light. Sokar is associated with death, punishment, and the afterlife. His realm is often depicted as a harsh and unforgiving place, reflecting his cruel and merciless personality. The character is intricately linked to the concept of hell in the Stargate universe, as he controls a place where the souls of the deceased suffer for eternity. Like the other System Lords, Sokar possesses advanced Goa'uld technology. His military strength is bolstered by powerful spacecraft, including the iconic Hatok-class vessels. Sokar's technological prowess, combined with his strategic cunning, makes him a formidable adversary in the ongoing struggle against the Goa'uld. Sokar is ambitious and constantly seeks to expand his influence and dominance over the other System Lords' territories. This drive for conquest and power makes him a significant player in the larger narrative of Stargate. Sokar's relationships with the other System Lords are often characterized by rivalry and conflict. His ruthless nature and expansionist agenda led to tensions and power struggles within the ranks of the Goa'uld. Sokar's realm, often depicted as harsh and unforgiving, serves as a visual representation of his cruelty. The portrayal of Sokar's realm reinforces the idea that he is a deity associated with the darker aspects of existence, making him a figure to be feared. One of his distinguishing figures is that he controls a version of the afterlife. This concept plays on the traditional idea of a judgmental deity who deems the fate of souls, and Sokar's role as the arbiter of such punishment adds a layer of malevolence to his character. Sokar is portrayed as having advanced technology that allows him to manipulate and control the dead. This goes beyond the typical Goa'uld power, showcasing his unique and formidable abilities. The association with death and punishment instills a pervasive fear among those who worship or serve Sokar. His subjects live with a constant dread of facing his judgment in the afterlife, creating a climate of fear and submission. The fear of retribution becomes a potent tool for Sokar to maintain control over his followers and enforce obedience. As a member of the Goa'uld race, Sokar possesses a highly advanced technology characteristic of this alien species. The Goa'uld have mastered technologies such as energy weapons, shield systems, and hyperdrive, making them a dominant force in the galaxy. Sokar's technological arsenal includes the iconic Hatak-class vessels, which are pyramid-shaped spaceships commonly used by the Goa'uld. These ships serve as both symbols of power and practical instruments of conquest. Sokar commands a formidable fleet of spacecraft, allowing him to project his influence across multiple star systems. His Hatak vessels are heavily armed and serve as both carriers for Jaffa troops and platforms for advanced weaponry. The possession of a powerful fleet enhances his military capabilities, making him a force to be reckoned with in the ongoing power struggles among the System Lords. Sokar's forces are equipped with advanced weaponry, including staff weapons and hand devices, both powered by Naquita technology. These weapons are not only lethal in direct combat, but also serve as symbols of the technology's superiority of the Goa'uld. Sokar's technological advantage is often demonstrated in battles, where his forces can overwhelm less advanced civilizations. Sokar is not only technologically advanced, but also strategically cunning. His military campaigns are marked by a combination of brute force and calculated maneuvering, allowing him to expand his influence and dominate. The integration of advanced technology with strategic acumen makes Sokar a multifaceted and dangerous adversary in the complex political landscape of the Goa'uld. Sokar is known for his aggressive and calculated military campaigns aimed at expanding his dominion. His strategic prowess is evident in the way he strategically targets and conquers planets, often outmaneuvering his rivals. The Goa'uld system is characterized by constant power struggles, and Sokar's success in these campaigns establishes him as a significant player. Sokar is not limited to overt displays of power. He engages in subtle subterfuge and manipulation to achieve his goals. This might involve sowing discord among rival system lords, or manipulating alliances to weaken potential threats. His ability to play the political game enhances the complexity of his character, and contributes to the intrigue with the larger narrative. Sokar understands the psychological aspects of warfare and governance. His reputation for cruelty and the association with death and punishment are tools he uses to instill fear in both his subjects and his adversaries. The fear of Sokar's retribution serves as a potent weapon, discouraging open resistance and solidifying his control over conquered territories. Sokar integrates his advanced Goa'uld technology into his strategic approach. Whether deploying powerful Hatok vessels in battle or utilizing advanced weaponry, Sokar leverages technological superiority to gain a tactical edge. The combination of strategic thinking and advanced technology makes Sokar a formidable opponent on multiple fronts. His manipulation of the afterlife adds another layer to his strategic toolkit. By controlling the fate of souls in his version of Hell, Sokar reinforces his position as a figure to be feared, ensuring loyalty through the promise of eternal punishment for disobedience. This control over the spiritual realm gives Sokar a unique leverage point in the power dynamics. Sokar's strategic cunning is particularly evident in his interactions with the other system lords. Rivalries and alliances among the Goa'uld are fluid, and Sokar navigates these dynamics to his advantage. His ability to outmaneuver other powerful beings in the galaxy contributes to the ongoing intrigue and conflicts. His strategic brilliance is marked by adaptability. He can adjust his plans and tactics based on changing circumstances, responding effectively to challenges posed by both external threats and internal dissent. Sokar's rule became a powerful motivator for obedience and loyalty among his subjects. It also serves as a deterrent against rebellion, ensuring that those under his rule compliant due to the perceived consequences awaiting them in the afterlife. Later in Season 3 of SG1, when he managed to capture the Goa'uld Apophis, he led an uprising and eventually came back to kill Sokar.
Once little more than an Ashrak, with a name lost to history while in the service of Ra, Marduk was once sent to kill Ashuli, who was the Goa'uld leader of Eridu, an area now known as southern Iraq, and quickly rose to become one of Ra's greatest and most trusted lieutenants. It was because of this act that he took the name Marduk, meaning Bull of the Sun. He used this position to great effect when Tiamat launched a revolt against Ra, pledging to remove the Mad Queen if the System Lords gave him free rein to do so and recognized him as one of their own. Although some wanted him killed for presuming he could ask for this out of hand, most agreed and hoped for his bloodthirsty nature to either succeed or cause him to die in the attempt. Either outcome would have been acceptable to them. Marduk soon took command of the entire combined fleets, once controlling over a dozen Hatoks, as well as countless other support vessels, and executed several attacks which drew Tiamat's forces into traps set in the key systems, destroying the stars of these systems, causing them to go supernova. Marduk's subjects managed to take most of Tiamat's forces out of their suicidal attacks. It was during this time that Marduk himself infiltrated Tiamat's court and engaged her in person, while the space battles distracted her. Even without her space fleets and loyal Jaffa, Tiamat almost managed to kill Marduk, and he only managed to save himself by luring her into a trap, which he had prepared with the transportation rings. This trap literally cut Tiamat in half. leaving part of her in the temple with Marduk and the rest transported to her flagship in orbit. Celebrating his victory, Marduk performed an ancient ritual and expanded upon it by ritually preparing and eating the body of his fallen foe. It was through this that, unexpectedly, he gained Tiamat's knowledge and memories, through which he had learned of her plans to create an army of monster Goa'uld, which he was going to use to replace the System Lords. He promptly commanded several Naquadah-laden motherships to plunge into the star which the planet orbited, causing a mini-nova which immediately wiped out the small human population, as well as Tiamat's orbiting facilities. What he did not know was that these monster Goa'uld survived. The same memories led to Marduk going to Kinju, an Onus-hosted Goa'uld's son or consort to Tiamat, whom she had entrusted with her eye, a powerful artifact which later Anubis' mothership was powered by. Marduk managed to capture Kinju alive, and presented him to the assembled System Lords, sealing the pact which had them join him as one of the ranks, and naming him Master of the Eye of Tiamat, as well as all Tiamat's former possessions. Marduk decapitated and ate Kinju before the other lords' very eyes. Starting his new empire, Marduk expanded his following through Queen Zapani, one of Tiamat's daughters who he had spared. In keeping with his high opinion of himself, he wanted nothing less than physical perfection for the hosts of his subordinates, and was not above taking beings from even the lowest social stature to become hosts. Some symbiotes rejected their hosts, however, and were promptly killed and served to others as an example. If Marduk was to deal with these beings every day for eternity, then he demanded that they be beautiful and obey his every command. Because of this, Zarpani was kept busy creating replacements. The other System Lords, although acknowledging their debt to him, did not truly welcome Marduk's rise to power. Marduk took over several of his neighbors' territories, acting as if he knew them personally. While any spies sent by rival Goa'uld into his court revealed everything they knew to him, rather than reporting back to their own masters. Continuing to use cannibalism and other tactics which shocked and inspired fear in both his subjects and his enemies, he accidentally united his enemies in their denunciation of his barbarism. Despite this, many of the weaker lords feared that they would have taken him down if they openly opposed him. Powerful lords such as Ra and Kronos blocked any attempts to rally support against him, for as long as he continued to be of use to them, and Marduk soon counted over 100 Goa'uld kills, with even a few lords among them. At the height of his power, Marduk's planets included several Naquadah mines, 2 entire shipyards, and even some trinium production facilities. Among these planets was Zigara, one of his treasury planets, which contained large amounts of natural deposits of gold, Naquadah, and the various crystals and gems which powered Goa'uld technology. His armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and only grew with each Goa'uld Marduk killed, absorbing their armies into his own. Marduk realized that his strength lay in the name which he had forged for himself, and so he often led his attack fleets personally in order to inspire awe in his allies and bring terror to his foes. He did, however, believe his entire forces to be utterly replaceable, and would often send many of his own ships to their deaths in order to achieve his objectives. After he had defeated the enemy, the resources and troops would be used to replace any that he had lost in those battles. Despite his total lack of compassion for his own troops, he would never overcommit them even in his days of madness, and was a shrewd general who picked his battles wisely, often attacking targets with lightning strike tactics, which would subdue the enemy immediately. These tactics worked especially well with primitive planets, which were only good for their human resources, where he could arrive, convert the people, and take whatever he needed with a minimum of fuss. Once he was successful, he would personally address the entire population through making extensive use of ring teleporters, which kept him from ever becoming a target for any length of time. However, brute strength would not always suffice to subdue an enemy, and Marduk knew this fact well. In these cases,
he would use the ring transportation system to insert small amounts of his own troops into enemy key areas. This act often took years for him to build up a fifth column inside a foe of near equal stature to himself, such as when he defeated the Goa'uld Sin and their entire empire of the moon, but would enable him to have forces in place so that the enemy would not know that a blow was coming until Marduk himself appeared through concealed rings to deliver the fatal stroke. Any warriors who joined his forces quickly got used to these tactics, as he would often practice these lessons among them to instill loyalty. Even if this was not enough, his subjects were constantly reminded of all his past successes in glorious battle through an ingenious security system. Marduk's peltax, engine rooms, and other vital areas of both his ships and temples were marked with cuneiform representations of his defeats of Tiamat, among others, which would have some small parts out of order. In order to gain access to these areas, his followers would have to learn the stories by heart, which SG1 would later recognize as being Babylonian creation myths, and correctly identify these incorrect sequences to unlock the doors. Outside transport systems would also have a key in some form of these myths to activate receiving stations inside Marduk's strongholds. Occasionally, he would allow his enemies to live, but on the occasions that he did, the hunger to consume their memories within him grew, and eventually became his primary focus. The flood of others' memories soon became a cacophony of voices within his head, and he started to kill not only his enemies, but those who had suited his increasingly bizarre whims. This caused his allies within the System Lords to no longer have any reason to support him, and even his own priesthood began to balk as any of them could be on his menu next. Seeking this opportunity, Marduk's son Bel encouraged a rebellion, which Marduk's own people, and even supplied them with a fitting punishment. Due to him being a cruel tyrant, eventually his own priests rebelled against him. He was locked in a sarcophagus on the planet P2X338, along with the Eye of Tiamat and a carnivorous creature that ate him alive, only to be healed by the sarcophagus, which in turn started the whole process over again. He eventually escaped into the creature, however, and ate his former host. In 1999, Russian doctor of archaeology Alexander Britsky began an excavation in southern Iraq near Rafta, where he found several tablets engraved with Babylonian cuneiform symbols, and one with an unknown set of symbols later revealed to be a Stargate address, the coordinates for P2X338. Though the Russians did not have a Stargate at this time, they did have a DHD, which contained these symbols and so classified the entire dig, never allowing it to become public knowledge. When Russia set up their own Stargate program, Russian Army intelligence gave secret orders to Major Valentin Kerensky to go to the planet and retrieve a magical device known as the Eye of Tiamat, along with Dr. Alexander Britsky. The team did in fact manage to find the eye, along with Marduk's former host body in his sarcophagus, but at the same time freed the carnivorous creature, which Marduk had taken as its host. In the creature's body, Marduk was responsible for the deaths of the entire team, either for murdering them himself or causing them to use their cyanide pills to commit suicide, which left him without a viable host which he could use to escape the ziggurat. As he ate their dead bodies, he cocooned himself in the creature, biding his time. SG1 later came to P2X338, discovering the ziggurat along with the empty packet of cigarettes left by the former Russian team. They went back to Earth and reported to Stargate Command, who discovered the facts surrounding the secret Russian team, which led to SG1 being sent back to the planet, along with a further Russian team to assert the status of their comrades. Marduk again awoke when Colonel Alexei Zhukov set off a booby trap, causing the entrance to the ziggurat to close. He attacked Lieutenant Tolonev in the body of the creature, poisoning her before he took Major Sergei Valerin as a host. In his new body, Marduk attempted to kill the other Earthlings in order to escape and once again take a place of power. Due to his host memory, he knew the Russian team's attempt to retrieve the Eye of Tiamat, and so attempted to retrieve it from the Russian commander, Zhukov, before he killed him.
Zukov seemed to be about to throw him the eye, but instead passed him a grenade, which had its pin pulled. This caused the entire room that they were in to collapse on itself, an event which Colonel Jack O'Neill witnessed, and so SG1 presumed Marduk to have been killed. During this time, Dr. Jackson had managed to find some transportation rings, which he believed would take them to another temple a few miles away. Marduk had survived the grenade, only losing the arm which had held the grenade, and managed to free himself from the rubble in time to discover SG1 just before they were about to ring out. Captain Samantha Carter used a remote to activate a pile of C4 along with some Russian explosives, and the group escaped through the rings. Marduk was thought killed when the explosive detonated, destroying the ziggurat and killing him.
Behold! Your queen.
Sharae.
Kneel before your queen!
Sharae, it's me.
So, Amenet was the gold queen of Apophis, also being his mate. When Amenet became mature enough to take a host in 1997, Apophis set out to search the galaxy for a suitable host. While the search was being conducted, Amenet herself lay in the belly of a Jaffa high priestess, Yanitha. Among the women brought for Amenet's inspection were senior airman Carol Westerlings and Sharae. Amenet rejected over 50 human females, including Westerings, whom Apophis later killed. When presented with Sharae, Amenet accepted, entering Sharae through the back of the neck and taking her as a new permanent host. Sharae's husband, Dr. Jackson, came with SG1 to attempt to rescue her and her brother, Skara, but Amenet had successfully blended with Sharae and taken full advantage of her as a host. Jackson and the rest of the team was sent to Chulak and forced to leave without her and Skara. Jackson, from this point, remained with Stargate Command to search the galaxy for Sharae and even joined SG1 in the hope of getting her back. Amenet had now taken on the full responsibilities of being a Goa'uld queen, creating a new Goa'uld larva and upholding her status as Apophis mate. Later, Amenet and Apophis mated through their hosts and conceived a human son. The child would be a Harcesis, the offspring of two Goa'uld who contained all the genetic memory of the Goa'uld, an act that was forbidden. Amenet gave up control of Sharae, who was hidden away by Apophis on Abydos, for fear of making the child stillborn. When the child was born, Amenet regained dominance over Sharae. Amenet was tricked by a disguised Teal'c that Harrower, a rival system lord, had stolen the child for his own, and explained this to Apophis. The child himself was hidden away amongst the people of Abydos. Amenet, following the fall of Apophis, went renegade and entered the service of Harrower. Amenet somehow learned the truth of what happened to her son, and led an invasion force to Abydos, taking many Abydonians hostage and regaining her son, capturing the Abydonians as a pretext to trick Harrower. Concerned the system lords would keep looking for him, Amenet entrusted him to one of her handmaidens who took him to Sanctuary on Keb. At this time, a heavily armed commando team arrived, led by Dr. Jackson, who freed the Abydonians and massacred Harrower's Jaffa in a massive battle. Jackson learned of Amenet's presence and confronted her at gunpoint. Sharae couldn't gain dominance, and Amenet was poised to kill Jackson with her Karakesh until Teal'c came and was forced to shoot and kill Amenet with his staff weapon. Amenet died first, and Sharae regained control long enough to say goodbye to her husband. Kronos was a Goa'uld that was one of the most influential of all the system lords up until his death in 2001. In Greek mythology, Kronos is one of 12 Titans, immortal beings of great strength and power, who ruled before being overthrown by the Olympians. The 12 children of the Titans, led by Kronos' son Zeus, engaged in a 10-year war that elevated them at its conclusion to the principal deities of the Greek pantheon. So Kronos, allying with the supreme system lord Ra and with Apophis, one of his mortal enemies, were among the main system lords who allied to overthrow Sokar, with Kronos being the one to formally banish him. Following the death of Ra, Kronos was alongside Apophis and Heror, one of the Goa'uld who largely came to fill the void left by Ra's demise. He is the father of Hera, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon. Kronos was also noted as being the first to use the Cormac bracelets. Ronak, the father of Teal'c, was his first prime, but had ordered a retreat for which Kronos killed him, crushing his Primta, causing a slow, agonizing death. Teal'c and his mother were banished to Tulak, where Teal'c vowed to become the first prime of Apophis, so that he would be in a position to someday avenge his father. Kronos is described by Teal'c as being the most influential of the system lords. Kronos was also a bitter enemy of the Tok'ra. Upon learning that the Tok'ra Jolinar of Malkashur was on Mysia, he dispatched the Ashrak Idrith to kill her. Apparently tired of waiting for Idrith to act, he sent a Death Glider squadron down on the planet of the Nassians, but they were evacuated by SG1. The symbiote Anchor, who replaced the Tok'ra Kordesh to act as a spy within the Tok'ra, later sent word to Kronos of the contact with the Tari and the Tok'ra. Kronos sent 2 motherships to deal with them, but the Tok'ra were given advanced warning, and Colonel O'Neill discovered Anchor's duplicity. Thus, Kronos bore indirect responsibility for the formation of the Tari-Tok'ra alliance. It was assumed that because Kronos was highly influential and a rival of Apophis, that he might have used his pull to convince the other system lords to not join Apophis in his attack on Earth. When the Asgard sought to have Earth included in the Protected Planets Treaty, Kronos led the opposing delegation, which included Yu and Neriti. The system lords agreed to allow Earth into the treaty, in return for surrendering both the Alpha and Beta Stargates. Neriti opposed the plan, and used a cloaking device to conceal herself to attack Kronos, framing Teal'c. Neriti then falsely tried to heal him, but Major Carter healed Kronos herself after Neriti's duplicity was exposed. In return, Kronos agreed to support the treaty, and allowed Earth to retain its Stargates, but warned the Tari that if anyone was captured, they would be dealt with harshly. Neriti was then taken into custody. At some point in those 2 years, SG7 had confronted with Kronos, which saw the team forced to use Kronos' sarcophagus to heal Sergeant Castro of a serious head wound before fleeing back to the Stargate. 2 years later, Kronos took the planet Juna, previously controlled by Heror. When the robotic copies of SG1 came through, he had the Daniel Jackson double executed. His surprise at their robotic appearance caused a weakness in his position among the people of Juna, a reason that a true god would not have known that they were not robots. When they learned that they had gone to Juna, the real SG1 came to rescue them, and Kronos was confronted by the robotic Teal'c and the real Teal'c. Kronos attempted to kill the real Teal'c by killing his Primto like he had killed his father, but the robotic Teal'c shot Kronos 3 times with a staff weapon in the back, killing him. His body was then shown to the people of Juna to prove once and for all that the Goa'uld were not gods. SG1 received the added bonus of gaining control of Kronos' Hatak, which was used to destroy Apophis' fleet. Apophis eventually died when Kronos' Hatak was crashed into Delmak by SG1 and Jacob Carter. The death of Kronos, followed by the death of Apophis a few days later, caused the System Lords to enter into a war that the Tok'ra hoped would last for years. However, an adverse effect was that it allowed Neriti to escape and resume her activities in searching for an advanced human, eventually bringing her back into contact with both the SGC and SG1. Worse, it merely accelerated the events that resulted in the return of Anubis. So, in the shadowy corners of Goa'uld history, the name Anubis resonates with a dark legacy that transcends time. Born out of deception, betrayal, and an insatiable thirst for power, Anubis emerged as a formidable force within the ranks of the System Lords. Anubis's origins are shrouded in mystery, obscured deliberately by those who sought to erase any traces of his existence. Some tales speak of a forbidden union between a powerful Goa'uld queen and an ancient alien being. resulting in the birth of neither fully Goa'uld nor truly ascended. Banished by the system lords, Anubis became a pariah, lurking in the fringes of Goa'uld society. Driven by an unquenchable desire for godhood, Anubis delved into forbidden knowledge, mastering ancient technologies and unlocking secrets hidden from even the most powerful Goa'uld. His quest for ascension led him to the realm of the ancients, where he sought to harness their power for his own gain. Through sheer cunning and ruthlessness, Anubis orchestrated a plan to use an ancient device known as the Eye of Ra to unleash a destructive wave across the galaxy, eliminating all life. However, his ambitions were thwarted by the combined efforts of the ancients and the ascended being Omadasala. In response, the ascended ancients punished Anubis, stripping him of his physical form and casting him into a state of eternal suffering. Anubis, however, was not one to be confined by the limitations of mortal or ascended existence. Manipulating the loopholes of cosmic rules, he found a way to interact with the physical world through the use of advanced technology. Restored to the semblance of corporeal form, Anubis embarked on a quest to reclaim his lost power and exact revenge upon both the ascended and the system lords who had cast him aside. With the aid of loyal followers and advanced weapons, Anubis rose again as a force to be reckoned with. He manipulated the political landscape of the Goa'uld Empire, orchestrating alliances and betrayals that left his rivals weakened. Anubis's mastery of ancient technology set him apart, granting him unparalleled power over life and death. His army of genetically engineered warriors known as Coal Warriors struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. Anubis harnessed the power of the Naquadah enhanced staff weapon and developed advanced spaceships that surpassed the technological prowess of the traditional Goa'uld system lords. Anubis's campaign of dominance reached a critical point when he launched an assault on Abydos, the sacred planet that once held significance for the people of Earth. Despite the valiant efforts of SG1 and their allies, Anubis succeeded in destroying the planet, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. As the galaxy trembled under the threat of Anubis's ascendancy, the Free Jaffa nation, the Tok'ra, and the Tari joined forces to confront this malevolent force. The climactic battle unfolded in the heart of the lost city of Atlantis, where Anubis sought to unlock the secrets of ascension. In a desperate attempt to thwart Anubis's plans, Omadasala intervened, engaging in a cosmic struggle that transcended the physical and spiritual realms. Their battle echoed across the cosmos, a clash of titans that defied the laws of both ascended and mortal existence. As the struggle raged on, doubts crept into the minds of those who witnessed the cosmic confrontation. Would Anubis, with his relentless pursuit of power, ultimately prevail? Or would the ancient principles of cosmic justice win? The cosmic battlefield became a canvas upon which the fate of galaxies hung in the balance. Anubis, driven by an insatiable thirst for dominance, wielded the remnants of ancient power with unrivaled fury. Omadasala, a symbol of ascended benevolence, countered with an ethereal grace that defied the tangible constraints of reality. As the struggle unfolded, Anubis drew upon forbidden knowledge acquired during his quest for ascension. The very fabric of existence quivered under the weight of their cosmic clash, and the onlookers, mortal and ascended alike, found themselves torn between dread and hope. In the end, the cosmic struggle reached an enigmatic resolution. Omadasala, with a sorrowful gaze, made a fateful decision that transcended the limitations of understanding. Anubis, through a shadow of his former self, persisted in a state of eternal torment. Omadasala's act of mercy resonated across the ascendant planes, leaving questions in its wake. Had Anubis truly been defeated, or had Oma in her infinite wisdom found a way to temporarily keep him in check? Yet, in the shadows of cosmic history, the question remained, would the echoes of Anubis' dark reign ever truly fade, or would they linger as a haunting legacy, a warning to those who dared to tread the treacherous path of power and godhood?
So, Harrower was a GOA'ULD who was the son of Ra and Hathor. Like his father, he was protected by the Horus Guards. He was a very militaristic system lord, feared even among the GOA'ULD. For thousands of years, Harrower, under the name Horus, controlled the planet Tegria, At some point around 300 years before the present, he abandoned the planet, either due to a lack of resources remaining or a rebellion. Whatever the reason, the people buried the Stargate and destroyed all traces of that part of their history where Harrower had ruled. Only a small sect knew the truth about Tigria's past, and still worshipped him as a god, collecting artifacts from his time as ruler of the planet. After the death of his father Ra, Harrower took control of most of his empire, and became one of the dominant system lords, eventually taking advantage of the fact that Thor's hammer was destroyed. Harrower attempted to conquer Chimera despite it being a planet protected by the Asgard. The Chimerans contacted Earth, who sent SG1 to help. After a brief encounter with Harrower himself, Captain Samantha Carter and Dr. Daniel Jackson were able to use the Hall of Thor's might to contact Thor. Thor came in his ship and destroyed his troops, camp and ship landing platforms. With no other option, Harrower retreated through the Stargate rather than be taken. For a long time, Harrower was a rival of Apophis. When he learned Apophis and Amenet had sired a Harcesis child, Harrower attempted to take the child. However, Teal'c and Dr. Jackson were able to deceive him into thinking Apophis had the child, while manipulating Apophis and Amenet into believing Harrower had stolen the child. Harrower nearly killed Daniel Jackson, but was forced to retreat when Colonel O'Neill damaged his hand device by throwing a knife through it. For generations, Harrower controlled the planet Juna, though this was mainly through his Jaffa, as he hadn't actually visited in a long time. At some point before his death in 2000, SG1 arrived and informed the people they no longer had to worship Harrower as a god. After winning a rebellion against Harrower's Jaffa, they instructed them to bury the Stargate. This kept Harrower or any other GOA'ULD from returning until Kronos reclaimed the planet in his ship. When Sokar returned, he made his presence known by attacking the forces of Harrower. Following the fall of Apophis, Amenet entered the service of Harrower. Amenet somehow learned the truth of what happened to her son, and led an invasion force to Abydos, taking many Abydonians hostage and regaining her son, capturing the Abydonians as a pretext to trick Harrower. Concerned the System Lords would keep looking for him, Amenet entrusted him to one of her handmaidens, who took him to the sanctuary on Keb. Harrower sent a force consisting of several motherships after Chlorel in order to capture him. Chlorel piloted his ship towards Tolana, as he knew that the Tolan would use their ion cannons against him. 2 of Harrower's motherships were destroyed in the process, but Harrower himself survived. Eventually, he sought out Apophis, to forge an alliance to control the GOA'ULD Empire. As a sign of friendship, Harrower offered Apophis Teal'c, who had been captured by Harrower's Jaffa. SG1 and Jacob Carter sabotaged the alliance, hoping it would result in a war that would decimate both System Lords' forces. However, Apophis had brought a cloaked fleet into the minefield and used it to protect himself as he destroyed Harrower, killing him. Apophis easily absorbed Harrower's forces into his own, becoming the most powerful System Lord in existence. Teal'c managed to escape, with the help of Ragnar, the Jaffa who had originally kidnapped him for Harrower. Months later, the System Lords fell into disarray with the deaths of Harrower, Apophis, and Kronos, the most powerful remaining System Lords. The System Lords held a summit to reconcile the power vacuum left in the wake amongst the remaining System Lords. It was not to be. Harrower's death, as well as those of Apophis and Kronos, helped pave the way for the return of Anubis.
So, though she was believed to have been dispatched to rule other planets in Ra's name, inciting loyalty in the people's god and quelling any rebellions that appeared, it is in fact thought that she spent most of Ra's rule on Earth itself, where she was exiled for plotting against her master. She was put into a canopic jar, which fell into the hands of Napoleon, along with other artifacts such as an arc bomb, which was later acquired by Nazi Germany. After World War II, it ended up in the hands of a Nazi war criminal, and eventually, after his death, his son. Teal'c said that tales are still told of the fall of Sekhmet. She allied herself with Apophis against Ra, and she was punished in a manner so protracted and painful that the stories still circulate 2,000 years later. It is unknown what happened to the artifacts after this time, but sometime between 2004, rogue NID agents had managed to acquire the artifacts, including Sekhmet's canopic jar, which had fallen into the hands of the Nazis, and eventually Dr. Keller, the son of the Nazi war criminal. The scientists attempted to gain the knowledge of the GOA'ULD, splicing her DNA with that of a human ovum, so that they could create a GOA'ULD human hybrid, which they assumed would have the genetic knowledge of Sekhmet. They were partially successful. They called their new creation Anna, and used nanite acceleration technology, which had been recovered from Argos, and then stored in Area 51, to speed up her growth rate, producing a fully formed woman in only a few days. Although this new child had the memories of the GOA'ULD, they only activated themselves when Anna was asleep, and they still had all the evil personality which Sekhmet originally had. Keller and his scientists proceeded to torture Sekhmet whenever she arose as the dominant personality. And indeed, Keller himself even tortured Anna to garner as much information as he could from the GOA'ULD. Although Sekhmet began to surface more regularly, the longer the tortures went on, she never offered the scientists what they wanted, information of the GOA'ULD. Sekhmet even attempted to blackmail the scientists, and in one attempt managed to escape and murder 32 people who were in the compound she was held in, even activating the bomb which was inside the Ark, before Anna regained control of the body. SG1 soon arrived on the scene along with Dr. Bill Lee, and he, along with the help of Teal'c, managed to defuse the GOA'ULD bomb. Though the team attempted to help Anna to gain complete control of her body, they did not manage, and Sekhmet kept coming to the surface more and more. Sekhmet gained control one last time and set fire to the cell, escaping. Anna at some point regained control of her body, and just Anna killed Keller, saying the evil she saw in herself was nothing compared to the evil she saw in him. Anna, unwilling to accept her life being a servant of the GOA'ULD, which was indeed part of her, activated a failsafe device which Keller had designed, and so released a deadly toxin into her body, killing both beings inhabiting it. It is unknown if Sekhmet's symbiote is still alive, though it is unlikely, as the NID likely killed the symbiote in order to gain access to his DNA. Sekhmet was known as the Daughter of Ra, where she was known by several names, including the Great Huntress and the Lady of Flame. These same myths spoke of powerful weapons at her command that were known as the 7 Arrows of Sekhmet, and her Jaffa guard had lion helmets. At some point, legend spoke that she defied her father, with her followers claiming that she worked to protect her people from the evil Ra. Regardless, she was cast aside and banished for her actions, which saw her being imprisoned in darkness within the canopic jar. Her 7 arrows were separated between Ra, Apophis, Yu, Osiris, Baal, Anubis, and Amun under a blood oath that they never unite the weapons nor return them to their mistress. Russian scientists recovered the canopic jar, holding the symbiote, where they attempted to study her only for Sekhmet to awaken and take the female scientist as a host. Afterwards, Sekhmet began operating in the galaxy once more, where her followers spoke of her rise to power. It was believed that she had some part to play in manipulating the timeline, to her advantage, through the use of the Aten device. The effects of her actions saw Stargate Command being destroyed, with an alternate version of Jack O'Neill arriving in the present, only to die from radiation wounds. This led to SG-1 being dispatched to P3X-314, where Sekhmet had a meeting with Lord Amun as she attempted to recover the 7 arrows.
So Niratu seemed obsessed with creating advanced humans, which could serve as hosts. She tried various experiments, including killing the inhabitants of the planet Hanka with a bacterial infection. The only survivor was a young girl named Cassandra, in whom she planted a bomb in an effort to destroy Earth's Stargate. Fortunately, Cassandra lived and was adopted by Dr. Fraiser.
Later, when the System Lords agreed to negotiate with the Asgard to include Earth in the Protected Planets Treaty, Neriti accompanied Kronos and Yu as part of the Goa'uld delegation. During the negotiations, she was adamant that the Tari were too powerful and aggressive towards the System Lords for the Goa'uld to allow them to go unchecked, essentially arguing that the Tari were fair game and did not need the protection of the Asgard. Also, during these discussions, it was revealed that Neriti had long aspired to capture Kronos' domain. Using cloaking technology, Neriti attacked Kronos in his quarters, framing Teal'c for the attack. Colonel Jack O'Neill decided to bluff, saying that they knew she was experimenting with phase-shifting technology and she exposed herself. She was captured and became a prisoner of Kronos. After Kronos was killed by SG1, Neriti managed to rebuild her resources while the rest of the System Lords were distracted by the return of Anubis. She found out that Cassandra Fraiser was still alive and attempted to find more information about Cassandra in order to conduct more experiments on other people. At one point, she managed to sneak into Stargate Command using a Goa'uld cloaking device that made her invisible. When she was eventually discovered and captured, she offered to help save Cassandra, who was dying of a retrovirus that was turning her into a Hawktar. Neriti demanded her freedom cloaking device and a sample of Cassandra's blood in exchange. Major General Hammond initially refused. In an act of desperation, Dr. Fraiser held Neriti at gunpoint, demanding that she help. After Hammond agreed to free her and reminded her that Fraiser was Cassandra's adopted mother, Neriti healed the girl and was allowed to leave unharmed. Although Neriti admitted that without a sample of Cassandra's blood, she is forced to start over with the research. The Russian SG4 team later discovered her experiments to create a Hawktar on the planet P3X367. This time, though, genetic manipulation, finding Alabran in his ruined city after he had left Neriti. They brought him back to Stargate Command to speak with SG1, as it was because of them that Neriti was still free. Alabran informed them that he knew but soon died due to Neriti's experiments, seeming to turn into liquid. The two SG teams returned to the planet in order to help the natives, but the natives did not believe that Neriti was evil, as she had been the one to save them from a plague which had ravished their planet. Teal'c and Jonas Quinn were taken prisoner by the natives after Agar discovered their intent to kill Neriti in O'Neill's mind, and the others were soon captured upon Neriti's return also. SG-1 attempted to inform the natives of Neriti's true motives, while Neriti performed experiments on both teams, meeting with no success for some time. Neriti performed several experiments on members of both teams before finding that Jonas's Colonan heritage had caused him to be somewhat more evolved than the Tari. She was sure she could create her Hawktar in him, and even asked if he would submit to allow her to do so. Although Jonas rejected the offer, Neriti nonetheless performed several experiments on him. During this time, however, SG-1 was able to somewhat convince the natives of Neriti's true intentions, and after Agar read her mind, he discovered this to be true. Wodan then killed Neriti by telekinetically breaking her neck, but not before she made subtle modifications to Jonas's DNA that resulted in him developing the ability to see into multiple futures during a later mission. Also, Agar read her mind before her death, allowing him to reverse what she had done to everyone. So, several thousand years ago, Sitesh did not agree with his brother Osiris that the Tari should be civilized, and he thought that it would lead to danger. As such, he concocted a scheme to dethrone Osiris and claim his brother's empire as his own. He somehow managed to convince Osiris and Isis to strike at Ra, with him assuring them that they would be able to usurp the sun god from his throne. The three soon set their plan in motion, but at the last possible moment, Sitesh betrayed them and revealed their plans to Ra. His plan all along. Isis and Osiris hid in Keb, however. At some stage they left either by force or by choice, were captured by Ra, and stripped of their hosts, and their symbiotes were placed in stasis jars to be imprisoned for eternity. It was sometime after that the Tari rebelled against their GOA'ULD oppressors, and so Sitesh abandoned the stasis jars in a vain attempt to reach the Stargate, for it was buried by his former subjects. Unable to flee the planet, Sitesh was forced to live in secret. In 1999, The Tok'ra collected records of every past and present System Lord, but their intelligence on Satesh ended after the burying of the ancient Egyptian Stargate. Believing that he had been unable to escape Earth, Jacob Carter returned to seek SG-1's aid in locating him. Dr. Jackson discovered that Satesh had spent most of his time on Earth, forming various cults, among them one where he impersonated the god Typhon in ancient Greece, and a suicide cult in England near Stonehenge during the 18th century where his worshippers had died after slitting their own throats, but Satesh's body was never found. Daniel then tracked his most recent operation to a small group living just north of Seattle, and learning his latest human host was the coincidentally named Seth Fargo. Despite being stranded on Earth, Satesh retained an impressive cache of gold technology. He had enough Zatnikatels and gold grenades to supply a small army, a personal hand device, as well as a set of transportation rings. He also had a significant supply of Nishta, which he used to brainwash people into serving him. He also worried about the System Lords and the Tok'ra trying to hunt him down, despite having spent 5,000 years isolated from any contact with either group. SG-1, with the assistance of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, managed to infiltrate the cult of Satesh and break his influence over his followers by shooting them with a Zat. Satesh attempted to blend in with his worshippers and escape through an underground tunnel, but Selmak sensed his presence and removed his hood. Satesh then uses his hand device on Jacob and throws him against a wall. Jacob gives his hand device to Captain Samantha Carter, who chases Satesh and uses a hand device to crush his midsection, resulting in his death, finally. So, joining his father on his campaign against the Tari, Chlorel commanded the Hottok carrying the Stargate. However, SG-1 managed to gate aboard before they left orbit. Colonel O'Neill and Teal'c attempted to capture Chlorel and get through to Skara, but they were captured. Dr. Daniel Jackson and Captain Samantha Carter attempted to rescue them, but Chlorel began to kill Daniel with his hand device. O'Neill was forced to shoot Chlorel, but Braytak put him in a sarcophagus to delay the campaign. Braytak and SG-1 later took Chlorel hostage and ringed over to Apophis' ship, leaving them on the damaged Peltak. However, Apophis and Chlorel escaped back to Chlorel's ship and escaped by Stargate. While fleeing from a fleet sent by Harrower, Chlorel's death glider crashed on Tolana. The Tolans held a triad to determine who had priority over the body of the host. Colonel O'Neill and Dr. Jackson argued for Skara, while the GOA'ULD Zapakna argued for Chlorel. Both sides voted for their own kind. In the end, Laya of the Nox, the neutral party and the final voter, voted in favor of Skara, reasoning that Chlorel and Skara were capable of independent existence, but while together, Skara had absolutely no control, and life as a slave was not life at all. Although Zapakna attempted to destroy Tolana by targeting the Tolan's ion cannons, after Zapakna identified their locations, Teal'c and Laya were able to destroy the mothership by hiding one of the cannons until it was needed. Chlorel was removed from Skara by the Tok'ra. His final fate is unknown. So, Zapakna was originally an underlord of Apophis. When Chlorel was placed on Triad to determine priority of the body of Skara, Zapakna served as his Archon, initially attempting to win the debate by claiming that Skara was dead already, apparently convincing that nothing of the host survives after the GOA'ULD takes control. When SG-1 successfully refuted this argument, Zapakna used their argument as proof that both host and GOA'ULD could survive in the body, but Chlorel could not survive on his own. Zapakna actually used the proceedings to tag each of the Tolan's ion cannons, in preparation for an attack on Tolana. When Skara was awarded priority, Zapakna ordered his Hottok to attack. Teal'c and the Nox Laya hid one of the ion cannons, and used it to destroy the mothership, though Zapakna escaped through the Stargate. Zapakna was referred to as Zippy by Colonel O'Neill. After the death of Apophis, Zapakna managed to carve out a small domain for himself with his own fleet and armies, but lacking sufficient power to be an independent minor GOA'ULD, he entered into the service of Anubis, using his resources to further his master's goals. He extended Osiris the offer to represent Anubis at the High Council of System Lords. Zapakna himself led an attack on the Tok'ra base on Ravana, searching for the symbiote poison. The poison was eventually used to allow SG1 and Selmak to escape through the Stargate, though virtually all the Tok'ra were killed in the attack. Later that year, Kitano's rebel Jaffa launched an attack against Sepakna's forces. 3 rebel Jaffa were killed during the battle. So, Malak was a gold system lord. While on Earth, he was worshipped by the Canaanites and the Phosians. During his reign, he became known for his demand of child sacrifice, a trait which he took with him after leaving Earth. He continued to be a high-ranking gold up until his death in 2004. So let's get more into his life. Alright, so he declared that all female Jaffa born in his domain would be sacrificed in the ceremony of fire, as only male Jaffa could bring him victory in wars against the rest of the gold. So at some point, his high priestesses eventually rose up against him, forming the Haktil resistance to spirit away newborn girls. Eventually, Moloch learned of the presence of the Haktil and came to stop a meeting of rebel Jaffa among his ranks. His forces killed all but Ishta, Teal'c, and Aaron. Ishta was soon captured and tortured by Moloch. While there, a rebel Jaffa force Ishta had organized began to revolt against Moloch, who prepared to leave and end it. Moloch was killed when Stargate Command fired missiles through the Stargate, which were sent directly at him, due to Aaron pointing a laser designator at him, with Baal later absorbing Moloch's forces. Like most gold, Moloch was power-hungry, egotistic, and megalomaniacal. However, he seems to have been even more cruel than most of his kind. His behavior towards Ishta was sadistic and even deranged, as he seemed to find psychotic pleasure in personally torturing Ishta, while repeatedly proclaiming himself her god. Unlike most gold, he seemed utterly convinced of his divinity. Judging by how he ran his domain, demanding the killing of all the women therein upon birth, his insanity likely had few limits. So, Amaterasu was part of the Gold System Lords, including Lord Yu and Camulus, that sought an alliance with the Tari against a Baal who had seized control of Anubis's base and Coal Warriors following Anubis' defeat, and had gained a great deal of power ever since. Clearly seeking the weapon used to defeat Anubis for themselves, the Gold tried to bluff and threaten their way into securing Dr. Elizabeth Weir and Stargate Command's cooperation. However, thanks to Dr. Daniel Jackson's counsel, there was not much Amaterasu or her companions could do to persuade the Tari to ally themselves with the Gold. Amaterasu briefly considered letting information slip to Baal that the weapon the Tari used to destroy Anubis was out of commission, which would have led Baal to conquer Earth. While Camulus asked for and was granted asylum by the Tari, Amaterasu and Lord Yu left empty-handed, but not before she denounced Camulus as a traitor and a coward. Within a year, Amaterasu and Yu were the only ones capable of mounting any effective resistance against Baal, though the Tok'ra believed that their efforts were doomed to fail. Amaterasu was not among the System Lords to whom Baal sent a peace offering. In an alternate reality, Amaterasu had once ruled PX-7455 and was worshipped as a god by its inhabitants. The natives believed that she had abandoned them, and therefore represented an easy target for the Ori, who sent a prior to the planet. The SG1 of that reality claimed to have investigated the situation on the planet immediately before their arrival in our reality. Apep was an Unas-hosted Goa'uld and the physically superior son of Atok. He brutally murdered his father in front of the other Goa'uld around 22,000 BC, taking his father's troops as his own. He then decided to divide them equally among the strongest of his kind to solicit their stewardship. This ensured a kind of peace among the Goa'uld, and also meant that none could ever become powerful enough to challenge any other, as mutual destruction awaited anyone who tried. Apep soon declared his underlords as his brothers and sisters, remaining firmly in control, yet giving each of them equal rights and leadership. Each underlord pledged loyalty to him, and so Apep held rulership over many of the future System Lords, Nut, Thoth, Ra, and their servants Bastet, Isis, and Osiris. For a time, the Goa'uld were united under a single rulership. They swept across the galaxy, their numbers swelling to almost wipe out Unas for a second time as too many larval GOA'ULD were bred. Somehow during this time, the average lifespan of the GOA'ULD was significantly lengthened, which only caused further population problems. Because of these, APEP continued the ancient practice of ritualistic cannibalism. This pseudo-peace was not to last, however, as soon another GOA'ULD came into power around 19,000 BC. With victories too numerous to count, Anubis was born. He also pledged his support to APEP, and was brought in as another of APEP's underlords as the Lord of Death due to his ruthlessness. APEP remained wary of his children, as he saw greed in their eyes which could threaten the fragile balance he had created. Despite this, he was doomed to failure. The GOA'ULD under APEP spent the next 1,000 years mapping out most of the Stargate network, and building up vast fleets through the ancient technology they had discovered. Due to the fact that they did not find the original owners of their spoils, they soon carved up the spoils amongst themselves. Though a few species dared to stand against them, they all fell to the power of the GOA'ULD. Around 17,800 BC, after Thoth's invention of the sarcophagus, which introduced Naquadah into the GOA'ULD's bloodstream, APEP started to falter as leader of his people. His underlords became more and more daring, and Tiamat was welcomed into the fold, with others being cast out and destroyed. It was then that APEP started to show the signs of madness. The end of peace within the GOA'ULD was near. Anubis solidified his position with APEP, becoming his right-hand man, who was often found at his side. This caused dissent among APEP's original children, including Ra, who looked upon Anubis with disdain, as he was favored like no other. Great gifts and boons were given to him for seemingly no reason. Anubis spent the next 300 years becoming closer and closer to APEP, and eventually was able to solicit information pertaining to a great cache of ancient weapons from APEP, which he had been hiding from his other children, as they were so powerful that if any GOA'ULD was able to access them, they would surely destroy the fragile peace he had built. Anubis was able to learn this location through forcibly exposing APEP to Thoth's healing device, driving APEP further and further from sanity. Anubis, determined to take leadership of the GOA'ULD for his own, made his own bid for power by utilizing a super weapon found in the cache of ancient weapons. His plan partially worked, as he was able to capture APEP, removing and devouring his symbiote before the other GOA'ULD, declaring himself emperor. His power would not last, however, as Ra and the other GOA'ULD rallied in APEP's name and drove him from power. This would be the first time in their history that the GOA'ULD acted with nobility. Ares was a GOA'ULD system lord who controlled a relatively small territory within the Milky Way galaxy. His first prime was Treylock. As the replicators began to conquer GOA'ULD domains, the system lords were forced to retreat into areas they had previously abandoned. During the turmoil, Archon's planet fell under Ares' jurisdiction. To reassert his dominance, Ares sent Treylock and a legion of Jaffa through the Stargate to the planet now led by Harold Mayborn, intended to prepare the populace for their god's arrival. However, destiny had other plans. Just as an ancient had once witnessed a pivotal moment in history, SG1 arrived to assist. In the battle, they disabled Treylock and his forces on the ground. Meanwhile, Jack O'Neill piloted a puddle jumper into orbit, where he launched a devastating attack on Ares' mothership. With a single shot from the ancient drones, he destroyed the vessel, presumably with Ares on board, destroying the GOA'ULD's ambitions and changing the fate of Archon's planet. Bastet is fairly unique among the system lords, as the legends she inspired on Earth paint her as being a kind and benevolent figure, associated with protecting the homestead, women and children. This probably stems from the fact that all of Bastet's servants and Jaffa warriors were female. Before the discovery of Earth and the Tari, Bastet did not possess an Unas host, but instead preferred the feline race known as the Sekhmet. Most of her servants and armed forces were also of this race during the time. In ancient times, Bastet was a minor servant of Ra. She gained her fame and power during Ra's confrontation with Anubis. During a decisive battle, Ra's forces were on the brink of collapse, when they were unexpectedly reinforced by a second fleet, which had been gathered together by Bastet. It is universally recognized that Bastet's intervention saved Ra from defeat and death. Ra rewarded her with much wealth and power, and Bastet soon declared herself a system lord. She suffered a severe setback, however, during the second GOA'ULD dynasty, when the upstart Sokar seized most of her territory by force. Bastet survived by making a strong alliance with Kali, which allowed her to recover much of her strength by the Third GOA'ULD dynasty. This alliance has become one of the strongest among any GOA'ULD. An attack on Kali is an attack on Bastet, and vice versa. At some point, she and Kali together made a treaty with the GOA'ULD Sobek. Then, at the celebratory feast, they moved against him. Rumor has it that Sobek's head still decorates Bastet's palace in Bubadis. Bastet, admitting to suffering heavy losses against Anubis, voted to allow the powerful GOA'ULD back into his former position as a system lord. And then in 2005, Bastet, along with Olokun, was later killed when Baal gained control of the Coal Warriors. Belus was a GOA'ULD system lord who served under Ra. After leading a failed invasion of Oannes, he incurred the wrath of its native people, the Ohens, and was punished for his failure by being sent to oversee GOA'ULD forces in Babylon. When an Oness team followed him to Earth, they were able to encourage the local populace to rise up against GOA'ULD rule, causing him to be further punished by demotion to an underling of Ishtar, a position he continued to hold until after Ra's death. He was later wounded by Kel, and so took the Oannes warrior as a new host, an act which he saw as revenge against the Oans. During Belus' early years, his accomplishments among the history of the GOA'ULD were not noteworthy. He once served under the Supreme System Lord Ra, during which time he achieved moderate successes in battle. It was perhaps due to these successes that Ra bestowed upon Belus a small domain within his own empire, allowing Belus to act more or less autonomously, due to the fact that his actions had little to no real consequence on Ra's overall plans. Despite having no real power of his own, Belus managed to rise the rank of System Lord during this time. This all changed when Belus discovered a new planet, Oannes. Having discovered that the planet was home to a native species, the Oans, Belus chose to bombard their cities from orbit, driving them from their homes and making them easier to capture. Belus already had his own slavers on the surface, who easily captured thousands of the Oans and transported them to Belus' ships, which were waiting in orbit. Confident that he had achieved victory, Belus only left a skeleton force behind on the planet, and planned on returning to his empire with the newly captured slaves. However, Belus' ship was but a single day away from the planet when the Oans on board rebelled and overwhelmed their captors, moving to seize control of the ship. Belus was quick to flee his overrun ship with only his first prime in tow, but was able to engage the ship's auto-destruct system before doing so, ensuring the deaths of thousands of Oans on board. At the same time, the Oans who had been left on their home world rebelled against the GOA'ULD and Jaffa who had been left behind, quickly retaking their planet. Before killing all their captives, however, the Oans were able to extract the location of the Kontora through use of their memory retrieval technology. With this knowledge, a group of Oans warriors journeyed through their Stargate within days, intent on rescuing their captured brethren. Upon arriving, however, they were immediately set upon and captured by Belus Jaffa, and then brought before Belus himself. In the hopes of intimidating the rest of the Oans, Belus ordered all but one of the attack force to be slain, sending the lone survivor back through the Stargate along with the dead bodies. Although Belus thought that this would incite fear in the population when the survivor told the rest of his kind about Belus' vicious nature, it did little more than ignite a burning passion to confront and defeat the GOA'ULD within them. Within days of receiving Belus' message, the Oans managed to perform a series of strikes against Belus' forces on his homeworld, crippling most of his spaceships and slaughtering thousands of his Jaffa, over half of his overall forces. Belus was left with little choice but to flee from the Oans once again. It was due to his failure that Ra sent Belus to Earth in order to rule over the forces occupying Babylon, a duty which was considered fairly ignominious, and was deemed a fitting punishment for his repeated failures. Even in this task, Belus was unable to escape the relentless Oans, a small team of freedom fighters led by Amaroka, who were sent to his new kingdom within a matter of years. Though their ultimate task of driving the GOA'ULD from Earth failed with the death of Amaroka and the capture of Kel, another Oannes warrior, they were able to cause the local populace to rise up against their false gods. Once again, finding himself on the verge of defeat, Belus ordered those Jaffa who remained loyal to round up any slaves they could so he would be able to escape. Taking Kel as his personal trophy, he took the captured humans to a new world which he named Akkad, after the fledgling civilization on Earth. Upon his return to GOA'ULD space, however, Belus was punished by Ra for his repeated failures. No longer a system lord, Belus was sentenced to serve under Ishtar, an underling of Ra. Though Ishtar gave control of Akkad over to another GOA'ULD, Sargon, he allowed Belus to return to his former home world to manage the productive Naquadah mines. Despite being a prisoner, Kel was able to once again launch an attack on Belus within weeks of the two arriving on Belus's homeworld. This attack ultimately failed, as Kel was unable to damage Belus's symbiote, but it severely damaged his host. It was because of this that Belus chose to transfer himself into the Oannes warrior rather than kill him, forever imprisoning the Oannes warrior. This particularly pleased Belus, as he knew just how much Kel hated the GOA'ULD. After hearing of Ra's death, Belus saw another opportunity to gain power, but like his previous attempts, ended in failure. As such, Belus continued to serve under Ishtar, confined to his stronghold, though he was sent on an occasional minor mission for Ishtar. A broken GOA'ULD, Belus's only pleasure came from knowing that Kel was suffering just as much as he was. Ishtar continued to allow Belus to oversee one of his Naquadah mines, an operation which Belus considered to be extremely tedious, though it kept him too occupied to plot any further mischief. Due to his previous defeats, Belus believed that the Oannes were responsible for most of his problems, and so harbored a continuing grudge against them. The Jaffa in Belus's service were given standing orders to attack any Oannes on sight, and bring them before their master for slow and leisurely torture. During the first year of the Tari's Stargate program, Daniel Jackson was captured by Nem, Amaroka's mate on the planet Oannes. Nem, wishing to know the fate of his mate, used his species memory retrieval technology to bring up Daniel's knowledge of the Babylonians. It was only then that Nem learned Amaroka's fate, while Daniel learned that Belus had been a GOA'ULD. Though both men realized that Amaroka's mission had ultimately been a failure, Daniel acknowledged that the Tari owed Amaroka a great debt for helping them overthrow the GOA'ULD. Camulus was a GOA'ULD system lord in Celtic mythology, and was the god of war. Camulus is the first system lord to request a formal meeting with the Tari to discuss a treaty for the defeat of Anubis. During the treaty negotiations, Camulus and his fellow system lords, Yu and Amaterasu, demonstrate their well-known arrogance, making both demands and threats. Eventually, talks break down and the system lords are imprisoned after it is learned that they have dispatched a Hatak to Earth. Seeing no point in holding them, they are eventually set free, at which point Camulus requests asylum on Earth. His armies have been decimated. He has nothing to go back to. He believes he may be used to the Tari. Amaterasu and Lord Yu depart, but not before Amaterasu declares Camulus a traitor and a coward. Later, Baal demanded Camulus's life in exchange for SG1, which he claimed he was holding prisoner. Camulus explained that he had once bragged to the system lords about holding a ZPM, which was 50% charged. However, as Camulus couldn't figure out how to work it, he rigged the ZPM to detonate if exposed to an electrical current. Jack O'Neill offered Camulus the chance to use the ZPM to kill Baal. However, Camulus had been given a depleted ZPM. Baal apparently killed him afterwards, as Dr. Daniel Jackson told Vala Maldoran he is dead. So Zeus was one of the sons of Cronus, one of the most influential system lords, and brother to Hera, Poseidon, and Hades. So, like Dr. Daniel Jackson said, Cronus was among the early Greek gods, one of 12 titans who eventually ascended to supreme domination. He was the god of fate and eventually became father to Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Hades. Now, the last relationship may indicate a connection to the GOA'ULD Sokar. He once controlled many planets which were taken from him by Cronus, including the planet Olympus and Stenos. The son of Cronus, Zeus rose to power by plotting against his father, concocting a plan with his fellow siblings, which involved none other than Cronus' own queen, Rhea, to overthrow the Titans. Zeus insisted that the group strike against the strongest of the Titans, throwing the balance of power into question, and causing them to fight amongst themselves. Choosing Cronus as the first target, the group succeeded in defeating him, though Cronus himself still lived, and this action sent the remaining Underlords into chaos, just as Zeus had planned. Perhaps if the Underlords had united against the Olympians as their common enemy, then things would have ended differently. But instead, Zeus simply picked off his competition, and took the pieces of Kronos' wake. He became the same despot, corrupt system lord that his father had once been. Zeus remained in power for centuries, and little changed among his thunder god's retainers. But all was not well for Zeus. Kronos, not staying idle, had managed to retain his core worlds, and so began plotting against his former son, sending agents to infiltrate Zeus' throne world of Delos, to spread discontent in order to incite a rebellion. Along with this, these agents also told tales of the benevolent Titan whom Zeus had unjustly cast out of power in order to make way for Kronos' return. At the same time, Kronos gathered his fleet of Hataks and prepared for an all-out attack on Zeus' holdings. Directly coinciding with this attack by the Titan was a rebellion on Delos. Zeus was confronted in his very own palace, whereas Jaffa either lay dead or rebelled against him. His fleets were utterly devastated. It was then that Kronos revealed himself to his son, taking his place and banishing Zeus to the hell planet known as Tartarus. Though Tartarus managed to break most people, either driving them to insanity or to death, Zeus managed to cling fervently to his life for centuries. Luck was with him, however, as just when it seemed that his torment would never end, SG1 killed Kronos, and in the chaos that ensued his death, Zeus managed to escape and return to his former holdings once more, with the help from an unknown benefactor. Zeus didn't waste a moment, and started to spend all of his resources and time in an effort to reclaim his throne. This proved to be difficult, as many of the former Olympians were in fact either defeated or dead, or were no longer united with each other. In addition to this, much of Kronos' territory was up for grabs among the other system lords, and so Zeus needed to deal with their forces to gain rule over what he had once dominated. He soon managed to garner an impressive fleet, as well as the armies to crew it, and took advantage of the opportunities created when any of the other system lords fell. He quickly gained much of what he had once held. He was found on Olympus by an SG team during the middle of an enormous celebration along with his first prime, Heracles. The team found the two among the partygoers and believed them to be in approachable mood, even friendly and beneficial. Zeus used their trust to his advantage, informing them of the coordinates of an evil GOA'ULD who was in fact one of his rivals. The SG team went to kill this GOA'ULD, not realizing they were being used. But Zeus eventually tired of them and had no further use of the group, instead attempting to eliminate them. After Kronos' death, Zeus chose to attempt expanding his empire, and did in fact claim a world which the SGC had previously cleared of any GOA'ULD activity. When the SGC learned of this, they sent an SG team to eliminate this new threat to the natives, but upon arriving at the planet, they discovered that the natives did not want them to eliminate Zeus, considering him to be a beneficial lord who was protecting them from the other system lords. The SG team then had no choice of either abandoning the natives or potentially devious GOA'ULD or somehow overthrowing him in a way that did not gain themselves the natives' ire. It is possible that they chose the second path. Zeus was a GOA'ULD system lord who appeared as a 50-year-old human male with full gray hair and beard, preferring to wear the armor of his Jaffa warriors, along with an Olympian tunic rather than the more cumbersome Jaffa armor, which most other system lords seem to prefer. Almost all of his first primes have been descended from his very own hosts and their children, as he believed that they came from a superior breeding stock to that of other beings. He even managed to rebuild this after his first defeat by Kronos. In addition, he was prone to cycle through the same names for his servants, often giving the name of a fallen soldier to the next promising son from his own lineage. Through this, many of his servants have held the same name. Pelops is the GOA'ULD responsible for the creation of the Jaffa. Like several other GOA'ULD, he became fascinated with the newly discovered humans and set about to improve them even further. He created the Jaffa, whose purpose was to increase the likelihood that a host blending would be successful. The other system lords eagerly sought this technology, and Pelops reluctantly shared his findings with the greater community of the GOA'ULD in order to avoid being destroyed if he tried to keep it for himself. Unlike his greatest rival Nereti, Pelops did not seek to create better hosts for GOA'ULD. His reasoning was that the GOA'ULD do not conquer planets, Jaffa do. So Pelops became something of an isolationist, retreating to his small holdings on the fringes of GOA'ULD space and continuing his experiments. Seeing Pelops as essentially apolitical, most of the other system lords did not consider him to be a threat. Even so, during his solitude, Pelops developed a powerful breed of Jaffa known as the Spartans, which he used to attack lesser Goa'uld and steal their resources, gaining enough power to challenge his peers openly. Although Pelops is not really good or even less evil than the other Goa'uld, his human subjects generally have better lives than many others under Goa'uld rule. This is because Pelops has no interest in dominating slaves as such. Rather, his primary motivation is to someday dominate his peers, the other system lords. Pelops was responsible for bringing humans to Argos, and Tyrannus, Aegis, and possibly the Land of Light. In an effort to study human physiology and evolution, research presumably geared towards improving Goa'uld hosts, Pelops implanted the people who settled on Argos with a nanovirus that aged everyone 1 year in the space of a single night. The virus was transmitted through physical contact, and when Colonel O'Neill unknowingly married Cynthia, an Argosian woman, he was infected on his wedding night, and consequently aged at a rapid rate. The source of the aging was identified, and the controller for the nanovirus discovered in the base of Pelops' statue. Once the device was deactivated, the Argosians began to age naturally, and Jack was returned to his correct physiological age. Pelops had not made an appearance at Argos for a very long time, and while the Argosians were initially horrified at destroying the image of their god, once they understood what had been done to them by the nanoviruses Pelops gave them, the Argosians embraced Pelops' downfall and rejoiced in their freedom from his tyranny. The current status of the Goa'uld Pelops is currently unknown. So Thoth was one of Apep's original 3 underlords, along with Ra and Nut. Despite the formal title of underlord, in these ancient times this was the equivalent of what you would now call a system lord. Modern history records him as having the rank of system lord. Thoth was the original Goa'uld scientist, and is credited with the creation of the first rudimentary sarcophagus. This primitive yet powerful device exerted a heavy toll on Goa'uld symbiotes, and was responsible for inducing naquita into the biology of the Goa'uld species. Thoth was known in legend as the scribe of the gods, and he supposedly recorded his wisdom in the Book of Thoth. Thoth apparently allied with Anubis in his rebellion against the rest of the system lords. After Anubis murdered Apep and was defeated in a century-long war, he and Thoth were both exiled and stripped of the rank of system lord. He became a prominent scientist under Anubis during his exile. Much later, during Anubis's return, he was in charge of the Cull Warriors' genetic engineering and maintenance, and also worked on the Telchak device research. However, he was unable to find a fatal flaw in the genetic makeup of the symbiote of the Cull Warriors. Thoth was then killed by SG1. Sobek was a Goa'uld system lord who was known on Earth as the Egyptian god of fertility. He barely managed to maintain enough holdings to keep his title of system lord. In desperation for territory, he once attempted to steal one of Bastet's worlds. Bastet and her ally, Kaylee, retaliated swiftly. Sobek tried to sue for peace, and Bastet and Callie pretended to accept. However, at their celebratory feast, he was swiftly executed. His head supposedly decorates Bastet's palace in Bubadis. Another account has Sobek survive into 2003, where he made his way into the Empyre homeworld, seeking control of a parasite trapped in the chamber of the planet. To this end, bounty hunter Eris Bach was hired to capture SG1 so that Sobek could take Dr. Daniel Jackson as his new host to translate the chamber. However, Sobek's control over Daniel was weakened by both the parasite within the chamber and Sobek's own need to keep Daniel's consciousness more active than the Goa'uld preferred in order to access the subtle nuances of Daniel's linguistic knowledge. These factors, combined with his greater age and lack of a sarcophagus, eventually forced Sobek to abandon Daniel before his death, leaving internal scarring, but the enzymes that help the process prevent him from bleeding to death. Another account of Sobek's demise is set around the start of the System Lord War. While others fought amongst themselves, he made his way to an ancient planet in search of a treasure that he had heard mention of in the past. He sent his first prime Hemnock and a group of his Jaffa to the surface to breach the central temple. When they failed to find a way in, Sobek used the main weapon of his ship to make an opening. Instead, the temple collapsed under its force. The destruction activated the giant android guardian Kota, who immediately fired up Sobek's vessel and power from his sword. The attack destroyed Sobek's ship and killed him along with it. In yet another alternate timeline, Sobek survives to the year 2098, where SG1 encounters him with a Wraith laboratory, where the Wraith Queen, Shadow, is experimenting with creating gold Wraith hybrids. As part of this experiment, Sobek has successfully been implanted into the Wraith Bone Shard, with whom he is forced to share equal control. When Queen Earthborn attacks the facility, Sobek escapes through a ring transporter with Colonel Harold Mayborn, now a Wraith worshipper, and a tank full of gold symbiotes. Later, Sting, Colonel O'Neill, Major Carter, and James O'Kane raid the hybrid lab on Atlantis, destroying the other hybrids and capturing Sobek Bone Shard. The two are then taken to the System Lord Hecate, who supposedly intends to use the two in order to create a toxin that will kill all of the hybrids, before Hecate reveals that she is working with Sobek, injecting him with a compound that gives the Goa'uld full control of the body. Sobek then betrays Hecate, mortally wounding her host, Dr. Janet Fraiser, and killing the symbiote when it tries to flee. Killing Hecate's Jaffa when they try to attack him, Sobek sends her Hatak on a collision course with Earth, intending to release Hecate's poison, which will kill all of the Wraith and leave Atlantis for Sobek's taking. As Sobek attempts to flee on Carter before escaping on an Alkesh, he is shot at the head with a Jaffa staff weapon by Sting, killing Sobek and Bone Shard. Sobek's corpse is left on Hecate's Hatak to be blown up along with the ship by O'Neill using Atlantis drone weapons. Kerr was a GOA'ULD system lord who never rose to prominence in Earth's history, though many knew and feared him, appearing only briefly in both the Sumerian and Assyrian cultures as either a dragon or a dragon lord. He quite happily embraced this imagery, making himself appear more intimidating and giving him a reputation for his savagery. Kerr's dragon guards likewise wore helmets modeled after dragons, and the architecture throughout his realm also appeared dragononic in origin. He was one of the few system lords who truly accepted his subjects' image of him, and was intimidating and imposing even while dealing with his own Jaffa, ruling through violence and fear alone. He ruled from a hellish planet known as Herva, an unstable world in which was covered in mountain ranges and volcanoes. Kerr joined his scouting party when they went to the planet inhabited by Unity, as he was so eager to seize the crystals for himself, thinking that he could use them to enhance his technology. However, when he reached out to touch one of the crystals, it sent out a powerful blast of energy and killed the GOA'ULD instantly. Kerr's First Prime immediately ordered for the rest of the crystals to be rounded up and destroyed to forever eliminate their threat to the System Lords. What they did not know was that one of the Unity had taken the form of Kerr for himself and followed the Jaffa through the Stargate, taking the System Lord's place. In Earth mythology, Olokun is an African deity typically associated with water. This stems from his interest in acquiring water planets and his desire to find or create a perfectly amphibious host. During the GOA'ULD enslavement of Earth, he fancied himself something of a scientist, and set about trying to perform experiments on humans in order to make an amphibious host. Despite his ego, it turned out that he really had no talent for this line of work. He partnered with Nirti, who also had a desire to experiment on humans. Little did Olokun know that he was only being strung along by Nirti, whose only desire was to further her own experiments. Eventually, Nirti turned on Olokun and caused him to suffer such a setback that he was forced to abandon Earth altogether. Now put on the defensive, Olokun developed an intelligence-gathering sect of Jaffa, which he named the Kurvosa. These secret police helped Olokun rule his worlds with an iron fist. Olokun discovered an ancient device on one of his worlds that allowed him to transport Naquita, and only Naquita, between his planets. The device only worked in vast oceans, so it was perfect for Olokun. He used it to move caches of Naquita to and from, confusing his enemies and giving the false impression of having much more power than he really did. The Own freedom fighters are particularly damaging thorn in Olokun's side, due to the aquatic nature of many of his planets. Although his host is currently an African human, he has attempted to take Own hosts before. Unfortunately, their physiology doesn't sit well with him. Olokun was one of the System Lords who was present at the GOA'ULD Summit, which was discussing forming a new order to fight against their mutual unknown enemy, who was later revealed to be Anubis. Olokun had lost one of his Hataks to Anubis when the Jaffa aboard surrendered the vessel and switched sides. Yu believed that Olokun would attempt to kill him at the meeting, in spite as Yu's forces had recently defeated Olokun's. He was as surprised as the other GOA'ULD when Osiris arrived and revealed herself to simply be a representative of Anubis, and despite Yu's opposing vote, agreed with the other System Lords to permit Anubis to rejoin the System Lords. He had sent a Jaffa by the name of Aruk to capture the planet Oreo for him, believing it to be a fertile planet with great resources. However, Aruk had been met with resistance and took his role on the planet much more seriously than Olokun had intended, claiming himself to be an emperor, and wishing to unite the planet under his own rule, as well as deciphering the workings of the ancient device, which had once turned the planet from being fertile into its new barren form. An SG team soon arrived on the planet, however, and caused some trouble. At some point, Olokun managed to acquire an ancient device, which he was very protective of. The Ons managed to not only learn of this, but had in fact managed to see it. It was perhaps because of this that they started sabotaging GOA'ULD crafts and technology, sabotage that was eventually discovered by an SG team. Most of his fleet was wiped out in 2004 by Anubis, but Olokun was not among the casualties. However, he was killed along with Bastet when Baal gained control of the Coal Warriors. Chakran was once a minor GOA'ULD System Lord for many years during the reign of Ra, who frequently opposed the Supreme System Lord. While this put him in a great deal of danger, he took much delight in it. Despite the fact that he was opposed to Ra, his only major victory was when he managed to capture Pengar in one of the many territorial disputes which the GOA'ULD were well known for. Soon afterwards, he erected temples on the planet, one directly on top of Ra's former temple, and set it up as a base of operations. However, sometime during the 1700s, both Apophis and Ra made war on Chakran, resulting in his death at the hands of Apophis. Why Ra never reclaimed his lost world remains unknown. This is from the RPG Stargate game. Some 300 years after his defeat in 2002, SG1 discovered the remains of Chakran's temple on Pengar, and deciphered the former's ruler history from his temple's remains. Tiamat was a GOA'ULD System Lord who held power during the first GOA'ULD dynasty, and posed as the Babylonian goddess of primeval chaos on Earth. Driven mad by the near constant war and infighting of the System Lords, she became determined to destroy them. In the end, she on the planet later known as Marduk's Zoo, she genetically engineered a breed of monster GOA'ULD, both in the sense of monstrously powerful altered symbiotes and genetically enhanced monstrous wild animals to host them. She launched her revolt against Ra during this time and was branded a Mad Queen. The Ashrak Marduk soon offered to kill her, provided he was given free rein to do so, as well as a position in the System Lords. What they did not know was that he was in fact doing it to gain the eye of Tiamat, so as to solidify his power. Marduk managed to kill Tiamat near the end of the first GOA'ULD dynasty. Mars, also known as Phobos, was a GOA'ULD who served under his father, Ares, during the time of Machello's rebellion on the planet Dendrid. He later went on to take his father's place as Mars, the Roman god of war. Mars is the creator of the cyborgs, a species-enhanced Markos. The offspring of Ares, Phobos once served under his father during Machello's rebellion. Agents of Machello, having swapped bodies with some of Phobos' Jaffa through Machello's body switching device, gained access to the Hatak owned by Phobos. They proceeded to sabotage the transportation rings on board, causing the beams they emitted to disintegrate any matter in their path rather than simply creating an energy stream, which passed harmlessly between sets of rings, and let them be for some time. However, at a prearranged time, these agents activated their trap, which cut right through the ship and destroyed it in a fiery explosion. They had done the same to the Hatak operated by Phobos' brother, Deimos. Through this, they thought that they had killed both of Ares' sons, as well as losing him two of his precious Hataks. They were wrong, however, as both of Ares' offspring somehow managed to survive the traps, and Phobos went on to become a System Lord in his own right. Sometime after this, Phobos sought to usurp his father and replace him as the Greek god of war on Earth. Ares managed to crush his uprising, particularly due to Mars' brother betraying him, and so Phobos fled to the Romans, where he assumed the identity of his father, becoming Mars. The Romans worshipped him for a time before he was betrayed by some of his own, who returned him to Greece to face Ares' wrath. Ares managed to crush Mars' spirit, who ended up begging for his life, and soon sent him through the Stargate to the traitorous graveyard world of Gregtech. The entire event was recorded on a vocar as a warning to others who would oppose Ares. It was on Gregtech that he was discovered the Volca, a species in which GOA'ULD symbiotes could not survive, along with creatures known as Markak. Because of the lack of sustainable humanoid host bodies, Mars instead chose to build a cyborg body with a Markak as its biological component. Mars would enter the creature and assume control of the cyborg body. It was through this method that Mars managed to rebuild his civilization, basing it on that of the Roman Empire. His Jaffa's symbiotes were put into further cyborg bodies in order to continue serving Mars. In 1998, SG1 found the Vocar on another world where it was guarded by Apophis's Serpent Guard, and thinking that Mars would be long dead, chose to journey to Gregtech, where they had named TC9173. They first sent a Malp to scout ahead, and as soon as they saw a Volca on camera, witnessing their unique biological ability to phase through solid objects. What they did not notice was Mars Jaffa discovering the Volca and uncovering the Chappa Eye, which had been lost to them for centuries. Once SG1 stepped through themselves, they were met by the Jaffa of Mars, who captured all but Daniel Jackson. Daniel being saved by Atathi and brought them before Mars. Mars was pleased to see the Tari once more kneel before him, especially so soon after the lost Chappa Eye had been found, and was curious if Teal'c was acting as a representative of Apophis, seeking an alliance against Ares. Upon hearing that the group served a Republican term, he assumed that Ares had fallen to his advisors. He then planned to take Jack O'Neill as his new host in order to enact his vengeance through Aurelius, a member of his own Senate. Thought that the decision should be discussed in the Senate properly. It was at this point that SG1 chose to attack, stealing staff weapons from Mars' Jaffa and firing them on his former holders. They did not succeed, however, and only managed to wound Mars' first prime, Augustus, before their attack was brought to a halt. This act of violence earned Teal'c a place in the pits, and Aurelius was sent with him for his defiance of Mars' will. During this time, Daniel had been taken to Ulysses, who he found to be another GOA'ULD, by Ethi to seek his help. Ulysses presented him with a phase-shifting device, less powerful than that of the Tolan, but would not help himself. Back in the arena, Teal'c managed to best two of the legends who had been sent to fight him, the Minotaur and Medusa, but was bested in combat by the third, the Hydra. He would have been killed as Mars ordered his death by lowering his thumb, but was saved due to the Jaffa and the Senate rebelling against their god and attacking the Hydra before it could finish Teal'c. This angered Mars, and he issued death warrants for every member of the Senate, as well as ordering his Jaffa to hunt down Teal'c and his rescuers so he could rip their larvae out with his bare hands. At the same time, he started the preparations to transfer himself from the cyborg body into that of one of the Tari. His Jaffa soon found the traitors, killing Julian and taking the others as prisoners to face Mars' wrath. Mars chose to allow them to watch him take his new host, in O'Neill, before they were killed themselves. This act would have been completed if not for the timely arrival of Jackson, Atathi, and other Volca. Arriving through the very walls of the building, the group dragged Jaffa backwards into said walls before letting them go. The Jaffa died instantly by coming back into phase inside solid objects. O'Neill took this moment to attack Mars with an energy sword, but the attack was for naught, as Mars raised an energy shield from his Karakesh, instead repulsing O'Neill with one of the device's other functions. Although both Teal'c and Samantha Carter attempted to assault him physically, it was the actions of Atathi that stopped Mars. He simply phased his hand into the creature inside Mars' chest and ripped a hole into it. This was thought to have killed Mars, but this was not true. When his first prime arrived with Patrician, they removed the GOA'ULD symbiote from Mars' former host and put it into the Markek inside Patrician. Mars lived once more, informing his prime that there was much to do. Afa is a minor GOA'ULD system lord. On Earth, he was remembered as a minor Polynesian storm god. About 1,000 years ago, Afa ruled an aqua-rich planet known locally as Afnil, and to Stargate Command as P3X513. He set up moderate mining operations, including an atmospheric UV shield to protect his human slaves from the harsh sun. Unfortunately for Avnul, the mine dried out after about 500 years of constant mining. He abandoned the planet and chose to leave his slaves behind. Later, SG9 would visit the planet. Atum was a minor gold system lord and once a rival of Apophis. His last First Prime was Arkad, who always led his armies to fight against Apophis over the last years of his reign. One of the planets under Atum's control was Korak, which was later conquered by Arkad. Baelor was a gold system lord who ruled over the planet Magtirith. Baelor had been gifted one of the eyes of the gold from Ra, the Eye of Baelor. An uprising from Dagda, Manannan Maklir, and other minor golds in Danu's brood led to his downfall and death. It was Lu who struck the killing blow. His holdings were split among Dagda and Manannan, and were enough to propel them each to the rank of System Lord. Dagda was once a minor gold, formerly in the service of the System Lord Baelor. Along with Manannan Maklir, he was responsible for Baelor's downfall. Both he and Manannan divided Baelor's resources between them, and these holdings were enough to gain them both admittance to the rank of System Lord. Despite having won enormous power, Dagda was betrayed and killed by Morrigan, who at the time was the only underlord in his service. She killed him during a summit of his underlords with 3 shots from a Zat. His empire and armies passed to the control of Morrigan, as well as the possession of the Eye of Baelor. Dagda and Cuchulainn once allied with Bab against Morrigan, but even their combined forces could not defeat her. Diane Sicht was a gold system lord. He lorded over the planet Herelia, on which he had brought humans of Celtic descent from the planet Earth. They overthrew him while he was distracted with a bloody war against another system lord, but returned to Herelia 100 years later, posing as a Herelian scientist, and later bureaucrat named Sedran. He used this guise to operate in secret, and used it to develop a biofeedback weapon, which would be used against the Tok'ra and other gold, in which he had experimented on the gold Arawan, who was stranded on Herelia. One of his most loyal followers was a Herelian named Sulan. Indra is a gold system lord. He checked on the planet he had controlled in the past, Prakriti, but lost the planet in a war against a rival system lord, Vitra. Ishkur was a gold who was alive 5 millennia ago. Though his current status is unknown, he had an army of Jaffa warriors, but many as they rose through his ranks soon discovered that he was not the god he claimed to be. Ishkur branded these Jaffa traitors and ordered them to be killed. The Jaffa tried to fight against him, but were overpowered by sheer numbers, and so instead of a small group, set off to find the legendary planet Keb. Although they did not find it, they instead settled on a world the Tari came to designate P9G844 and called themselves the Sodan. Isis was a gold queen. The discovery of the Egyptian treasures from the ill-fated Stewart expedition included a canopic jar that held the gold symbiote Isis. The seal on the canopic jar had been broken during transit from the wreck of the expedition's ship, which killed Isis. An autopsy was performed on the symbiote at the SGC, and further examination of the canopic jar revealed that it was designed to function as a stasis chamber, imprisoning the symbiote presumably by Seth, according to the Egyptian legend. Having found Isis in the Isis jar, it was presumed her companion Osiris was imprisoned similarly. However, the Osiris jar listed among the artifacts was missing. Archaeologist Dr. Sarah Gardner ended up being the closest suitable host when Osiris was somehow released from his jar. Once he was able to return to Egypt and the sealed chamber where his remnants and those of his queen had been stored, he selected the attire and accoutrements of Isis in order to fit with his new host body. Olather, known as the Father of the Sky, was an upstart gold system lord who visited the Celts and took some of them to the planet Newgrange. While he did some good in freeing them from the kings of Terra, he then placed himself as the ruling god until his disappearance around 500 AD. Though his people did not know it, he had actually been slain by a rival, and their planet's address had simply been lost. Svarog was a gold system lord. He was present during the meeting of the High Council of the System Lords to discuss the recent unknown attacks in their various empires. After the perpetrator was revealed to be Anubis, he voted in favor of allowing Anubis to rejoin the System Lords. His forces attacked Latona and ransacked a number of cities, including the capital. Svarog used his Hatak in orbit to bombard the capital, but was stopped by the Sentinel and perished. Tonatui was a Goa'uld system lord. He fought against Quetzalcoatl above Xaltocan and defeated him, doing likewise with his own brother. He challenged Teal'c to battle, and Teal'c managed to kill him. Vitra is a male Goa'uld system lord. Vitra controls the planet Prakriti, having driven its former lord Indra. Though a warrior at heart, he understands the value of scientific research and technological development. He is obsessed with obtaining his old military units, so he raids worlds rather than assault them straight off. Despite all the setbacks he had encountered so far, he is convinced that Prakriti is home to a huge trove of old technology, and will stop at nothing to get it. His Jaffa are the Asura. So what did you guys think of all the Goa'uld system lords? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.